from Austin, but this is a wholesale rate, and if we were to buy a car and get a wholesale rate on that, it would be a great deal. And so it's a great deal to get the Austin water at no additional cost, just at the wholesale rate. However, the subsidy has really undermined the utility department, and it's not capped, so it's a growing expense. And I think that rebates would be a better way to go. There's some concerns people have about the growth of government and want to basically to tie up funds, so to take it out of your hands, the elected officials, how money is spent. Rebate system couldn't be handled as a monthly expense and sent to the residents monthly. This will also deal with an issue that there won't be any money left by the end of the year if the rebate is distributed annually. It's always hard to change a subsidy, but this can be done so that people are held harmless. If we can afford the subsidies, we can substitute the rebates by the subsidies. And one of the big advantages of that is that everyone is treated equally now. The more water you use, the more subsidy funds you get. Also, there are a few people in our affluent community who are low income, and those could be handled with a subsidy that was added into the rate on top of the wholesale rate. It would be a small amount because we're a pretty affluent community. There's only a few people that find themselves in that position at this juncture. I did some math in a document I submitted, so I'll refer you to that, what that would look like. But I think that by making another advantage of running our utility so that it breaks even is that the Austin rates are going to continue to go up, and really the only way we're going to get out of that box in the long run is if we go back to an independent utility system. By having a break-even rate, it's positioned so that we can use it also if we ever get in trouble with income, such that it threatens the property tax and no property tax situation. I appreciate that that's not currently threatened, but it could be if we make bad decisions. But I know you're going to make good decisions. So I appreciate the opportunity to work with you. Let's take a real look at this. You can hold people harmless by continuing to pay subsidies out of the utility reserve fund, but those will have to be paid back once you make the decision. Thank you very much. I'm done. On time.
Anushka?
Hi, Anushka Carmona, 1038 Sunflower Trail. I wrote my comments, but I think I'll just touch upon some of the points that I wanted to make. And I'm sorry to sound like a broken record on this one, but I think that the businesses bring almost all of our money. Our budget is of 5 million plus. We are not going to get there with anything other than the businesses recovering. We're not going to get there through subsidies. We're not going to get there through cutting other services. We're not going to get there through anything other than the businesses making as close to a complete recovery. Even if we paid the property tax, we will not get there. I also want to say that I just think that our community is always best served by trying to be as least divisive. When I've been talking to residents, I've really heard a series of false choices that keep appearing, and it becomes staff or subsidies, staff or reserves, subsidies or reserves. I think the bottom line remains that without businesses, there is just not the capacity to have the level of infrastructure or the amount of staff that we currently have. That's why before the businesses had, our city government was a lot smaller. I believe in efficient government. I think part of what makes our staff vulnerable in times like these is because we do subcontract a lot of things, and we do contract a lot of things. And if you have the firms doing some of the work, and then the subcontractors doing some of the other work, then we need to work on figuring out what we really want to do with staff to make it as most efficient, because at the end of the day, when money is going out, then it becomes, well, let's at least just keep paying these contractors and vendors, because a lot of the work gets done through them. I want to state unequivocally, I am okay with paying taxes. I am a big old Democrat. I'm a socialist. I am cool with it. I believe in government. I believe in paying our fair share. What bothers me is when it's set up as a false choice, when it becomes, well, it's going to be this subsidy that you care about, or this subsidy that I care about, or something like that. And I don't believe that we're yet in the situation where we have to make those types of choices. I think it's important right now, and I think that I don't think we should take any action right now on cutting subsidies. I do think that there's a study that's being done about the water that can help us understand consumption more. There's even as Mayor Cowan talked about right now, there's maybe other ways of looking at rebates or generating revenue. I don't think that we can diversify our revenue enough, no matter what, to $5 million. So I think ultimately I cannot express this enough, we really need to figure out how we use those COT funds in order to be able to continue with helping the businesses in short-term mitigation and in long-term economic recovery. The paradox is, right, that this is happening, and it feels like we need to do something now, and we are doing stuff now. We're having these conversations and we're making tough decisions, but at the same time, we do have some time to make them correctly. I would not like to leave people without money, especially folks that are on a fixed income in our community, if we're paying for things that are currently subsidized. But I also don't think that it's a false choice if you tell me that if I give you these subsidies back, then that means that somebody else doesn't get fired, or if somebody is going to get fired unless we do this. And I really would like more transparency with that. I think it's important that we're having these conversations now. I think we still have some reserves funds to dip in. I think if the reserves fund were okay to dip in for those big old buildings, I think that they're okay to dip in order to keep people employed and in order to help us figure out the best system for dealing with subsidies and our budget. I appreciate the time and y'all listening to me. Thank y'all so much. I hope everybody's being safe.
Thank you, Aneshka. I don't see that anybody else has their hand raised at this time. Are there any other participants in the meeting, attendees who would like to speak during citizen public communication? Mark Well.
Sorry. Hello?
Hi. Hi, Mark. Oh, it just says Well. It's Mark
I got to get a new computer. Yeah, my computer's from the Jurassic period, so sorry about that.
You're on.
Great. I just wanted to say, well, actually, I can read part of the email that I sent out earlier, the last email. I really applaud the mayor and Sylvia. I applaud your taking the swift and decisive measures by cutting the glaringly obvious and unnecessary city expenditures that were long overdue, particularly concerning the Public Works Department personnel. However, I feel that we still have, and I really think that there's more work that needs to be done in this arena. My hat's off to you for that. I appreciate your prompt acting on the unanimous directive of the council members at our last council meeting, as well as the time and effort that both of you put into it. And I wish to stress that I and other residents with whom I've spoken have found no ambiguity whatsoever in the motion brought forth by Council Member Ellett to reduce personnel expenditures by 10 to 15%. So I just have a few suggestions that the council may want to consider moving forward. The number one that I have is the city attorney. Hire another city attorney and get rid of Snakey's holdovers. Buckle and Young, get rid of them. Number two, combine staff into one building. What I suggest is maybe consolidate office space by combining city admin and public works staff into one building, thereby saving on utilities. I agree with Mark Bruner at the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting in combining staff into one building, and I also wrote about this in a previous email. Number 3, eliminate the position of Parks and Resource Manager. We keep Public Works personnel to an absolute bare minimum, to the ones who are actually outside serving the city, the ones who are actually doing the day-to-day manual work, clearing the ditches, grinding mulch, picking up brush, running heavy equipment, doing the maintenance, getting their hands dirty out in the field. By eliminating the Parks and Resource Managers at Public Works, it's my understanding that position, if we eliminate that, it would save us approximately $120,000 or more per year in salary and benefits by eliminating that one position alone. Number 4 is, I'd say, ground maintenance supervisor Sam Cantu. We put Sam Cantu in charge and continue working alongside a few workers in the field who will perform city services. Cantu then would report to the immediate supervisor, which would be the city administrator. Combined departments, number 5. Make the Public Works Department and I put like a sub-department or a subset of the city administration, and the Public Works personnel would be answerable directly to the city administrator and the mayor. And then lastly would be to really contract services. Rely more on contract labor and less on city employee staff for future city projects, for instance, roads, engineering, etc., and make said projects open for competitive bidding. So in closing, respectfully, it is my understanding that the City Council and the Mayor swore an oath to the residents, not to the employees of the City of Sunset Valley. That said, I urge the City Council and the Mayor to stay the course of fiscal responsibility by minimizing the drawdown of our city reserves and to further cut spending up to and including our keeping only the absolute necessary city personnel before we cut benefits to the residents. For example, imposing city taxes on the residents or cutting subsidies, etc. Yours truly, Mark. Thank you. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Mark. Charles Young, you are self-muted, but you now we can hear you now. You have the floor.
Can you hear me okay?
It's a little bit scratchy. Maybe
Hello?
try again.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but it's very scratchy on my end.
How is this?
Same. We can definitely hear
Try to
you.
bring this a little closer then. This is the one I talk on all day in Zoom meetings, so it shouldn't be too bad. I'd like to make a couple points about things. One, in Thursday's Finance Committee meeting, we found a total of 1.8 million, either cuts or shifts, for example, to cover wastewater subsidies from the utility reserve. The total amount of salary cuts was, if you exclude the cut made for the Public Works Director, was 162,000, or only 10% of that. I previously said that I thought those salary cuts were premature and unnecessary, and I think those numbers prove that. Secondly, I would like to point out that the disputed City Council resolution to cut salaries 10 to 15%, that total of $232,000 in cuts came out of a budgeted amount, and these are the figures that were provided for both the last City Council meeting and the Finance Committee, was that there was a total budget of $1.378 million. However, those salary cuts, that was a budgeted amount for both salaries and benefits for the next 6 months. 232,000 out of that is about 17%, but it does not include the cuts to benefits that will all go along with that. The total amount budgeted for salaries was slightly over 1 million. So that was a 23% cut, not a 10 to 15% cut. I would like to echo a couple of requests made during the Finance Committee meeting for City Council to consider bringing those people back. Those salary cuts were not necessary.
Charles, are you done speaking?
Yes, thank you. Also, if you
Okay, are there any other, I do see there's a couple more hands up. Last call for residents who want to speak. If you would please raise your hand. And Miles, I saw that your hand was up, but then it went down. I do have you unmuted if you wish to speak during citizen comments. Okay, are there any other residents who would like to speak now? Oh, there's Miles again. Miles, you are unmuted again. It looks like you might be muted on your own device. There you
Testing.
go. We can hear you now. Yes, we can hear you.
First, I would like to thank Council, Mayor Rose, and City Administrator Sylvia for trying to get us out of this very challenging situation and protecting us in all the ways that COVID-19 is a threat, including financial. And I feel compelled to echo what other people have said in support of the staff cuts, and not only because of the necessity to bring our budget down, operating costs down, when we aren't getting any real revenue, and there's no telling when that will change, but also because there seem to be inherent inefficiencies and overstaffing in that department. I've never felt comfortable with the way it was staffed, and I see how it has grown beyond it being a reasonable size organization. Furthermore, I want to thank everyone in advance for continuing to look through other ways of consolidating staff, of determining what we can live with and not live without for the time being in terms of central, non-essential services, and to let's be expedient. I agree with part of what Nesca had to say, at least our reliance on the shopping centers, and it's going to be a doubly or triply harder task now to make them relevant and profitable for us after the financial upheaval that's happened. People become familiar and accustomed to using Amazon and other internet deliveries. It's going to be very, very hard to make these shopping centers survive. That doesn't mean that we should give up. So I'm all for putting money into researching, developing an identity, and implementing something instead of sitting by and just coasting until there's nothing left in the coffer. Thank you once again for all your work that you're doing. I say that to staff, mayor, and city administrator.
Thank you. Do we have any additional public or citizen comments at this time? Charles Goyette. It looks like you, there you go. Now we can hear you.
Yes, hello, good evening. I just want to make this very quick. I agree with what Miles just said to say, and I think what we have to look forward to is definitely a change. I think we're going to be looking at reduced revenues. I think it's wise and very prudent what City Council has already done. They've followed the suggestions of the Finance Committee. I'm very interested to hear how the City Council are going to address with the latest round of suggestions that came from the Finance Committee. I think what we've already done is done, and I would like us to look forward and not backpedal. I think the issue with regard to the people that were laid off is a necessary situation. And we just got to continue to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. Are there any additional citizen comments, public comment? And Sylvia, if you could please, and maybe I have the ability to do it myself. I'm going to see if I can screen share. Yes, thank you, Sylvia. So now we're moving to item number 3, which are the reports. And so starting with the Mayor's report, and I do apologize for those of you who I know are logged in only by phone, and so I'll try to make clear references to the documents that I'm citing. everything I'm citing is public documents that you can find via the internet. So starting with the mayor's dashboard, I did want to highlight, Councilmember Rosengarten brought this up a minute ago. So if you were to go to the retail status page that I keep updated based on information provided to me by residents, staff, or the individual retailers, there now is for our open food areas, there's a link here, which you can, if you were to click on that, it would take you to a site which is called Sunset Valley Shop. And then when you click on it, it's been titled Sunset Valley Pantry. So this was mentioned at the work session, and it was a project that 2 of our residents, actually I believe 3 of our residents were involved, Catherine Johnson, her husband, and then 1 other resident put this together. And so if you go to this site now, it allows you to see each of our Sunset Valley restaurants. It shows restaurants that are currently open with takeout delivery options. And part of the impetus for creating this was to highlight restaurants that are also offering pantry items, so items that are not prepared food. So Catherine is also in the room if anybody has questions for her, but my understanding is that they will be maintaining this as they can, which would be based on information that's provided to them. There's also an email that people can submit to, which that is also going to be managed by volunteers only. And so this fits into something that Councilmember Medicus and I have both been discussing, which is to create more programs within our city that are truly operated and managed 100% by volunteers and residents. So where we're not taxing or asking staff to do any of the work. And this is a really great example of that. And so huge thank you to Catherine for spearheading this and for getting it up so quickly and giving us an example of how residents can come together to put something up that helps the retailers. Again, if somebody's looking for that, they can find it linked on the current retail status of the mayor's dashboard. The second item that I wanted to highlight on the dashboard, I had a few weeks ago proposed some cuts. I've now pushed those to the bottom and grayed them. So they're gray just in the event that somebody wants to reference it. But I'm now trying to, in the spirit of adopting and working together as a community, what is now at the top of that page is what is being proposed tonight as a recommendation from the Budget and Finance Committee. And so it is a combination of initial items that I suggested based on actual numbers, the salary cuts that were made, plus 2 additional columns. And so when we get to items number 10, this will be highlighted as part of the report in item 10. And then item 11 tonight will be the action item connected to this chart, which allows council and the public to deliberate based on what portions of this recommendation should be adopted this evening. And then last, for agenda planning, we are, Sylvia and I both are trying to get back to 2 things, as we're going to potentially have additional meetings. And so one thing that I wanted to discuss with council tonight is to what extent do we want to commit to the SITREP, the situation report meetings, which would be the in-between called meetings, work session style, meaning no action connected to them. To what extent do we want to project those out on the calendar? We had one last Tuesday. I, at this point, do need council to discuss and give direction to Sylvia and I as to whether or not we want to have one next Tuesday. And then if possible, if you guys could tell us how many weeks out you would like to have those so that we can prepare internally for how to get those agendas posted according to our legal requirements. We're also trying to go back to the normal way of reminding council members it is critical that you submit council or agenda items as early as possible so that we are not trying to process things the day of posting or days before. So as you can see for May 5th, we have a handful of items. Council members, if you see your name next to this, I would encourage you this evening to correct me if there's something on here you don't want to sponsor, or within the next 24 hours to correct me and tell me if you want something removed, reworded, or moved to a different date. The other thing that I wanted to highlight was the OpenGov that we rolled out this last week. And so for any of you that have not used this yet, I'm now showing a screenshot of the OpenGov site. Nice thing about this is it will keep everything that is open in one area. So you could view, as of right now, you can see tonight's meeting. As we start to incorporate all of our committees, it will also allow you to see any called meeting will sit here with the ability to add your public comments to them. They will stay open for, I believe it's 48 hours after each meeting. So even after the meeting has closed, you can still continue to show support for previous statements or to add new statements. Those statements will then automatically become a part of the record. When the topic closes, it will then move over to this separate list. And so you can see, as an example, when we rolled it out, you can see that the feedback is here. And the other nice thing about this, which I haven't seen any of our residents use it yet, but if you provide, let me go to an example for those of you that are watching. If you go to the feedback, and so you can see here, there at the top, there's a statement from Miles Fox. If I was to support his statement, so I'll do this right now. So if I support his statement, what he will see now on his side, and I believe he also gets an email that prompts him to say, another person in the public has supported your statement. Would you like to encourage other residents to support this statement as well? So it facilitates the ability for residents to also share a statement and garner support. And so I think longer term, as residents play with this, they actually will like it because it takes less of the question of, did council members receive my statement? And also the ability to share it more easily with other residents. And thank you for all of the residents who've already used this tool. And the next thing that I would like to ask for, so I had mentioned this at the last meeting, similar to the website that Catherine put together. This is another website that was put together by, I believe, a husband and wife in the Austin area. And as you can see, this is a site where the idea is you go here and it shows you any restaurant that is open, and it shows all of their different takeout options. And so what I would be looking for tonight, if possible, would be, and I want to see, Cruisteca is on here. So for example, if you type in one of our restaurants, it will take you there. And so what I would like to see, as you can see, it shows all of their options. It shows what they're doing, similar to the one that Catherine put together. This one, the difference is it's map oriented, so it also allows you to go just to Sunset Valley. What I've noticed is that many of our restaurants are not listed here. This is a free website. There's a form that can be filled out. And so what I would like to have, if possible, would be a volunteer or two within the people who are in attendance tonight to volunteer to go to this website and to ensure that all of our open restaurants are on here. And so with that, Sylvia, if you could take off my screen share. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And then if there are any residents in the room who would be willing, either a resident or a council member who would be willing to spearhead making sure that all of the Sunset Valley restaurants are added to this website. And if there is a resident who's willing to do that, if they would please raise their hand. Councilmember Rosengarten.
It seems that with all the information that has been gathered in the Sunset Valley Pantry, all that information now, I wonder if there's a way to just cut and paste it into the tracker or somewhere you have the
There's not. So if you go to the top of the tracker page, you'll see they have a link that says
you have to fill it in.
Submit. There's a, sorry, not a link, a button that says submit a restaurant.
Yeah.
And the difference between this site and the one that Catherine put together, so the one that Catherine put together is great because we can share it through social media, we can share it internally. One thing with this other site that I've referenced is this is a site that's being pushed on a larger scale than our local site, and it includes all of Austin.
Okay. We gathered the information, Wanda and myself, but what I'm wondering is, with that, do I need to get permission to put their information on this website?
You do not. So
Okay.
you certainly could call each of the restaurants and ask them to do it, but if part of what we're trying to do is to help give the restaurant every leg up possible, I think it would be helpful if there was, and I think if you had 5 volunteers or so, it would take one day with each volunteer, you know, taking a handful of restaurants. And so the more people you could recruit to help you, I don't think it would be that hard. You would just fill out the form for each of the restaurants.
Okay. Wanda, would you be interested in helping me again?
Wanda?
Sure, I think that'd be great.
Okay. And you can get
Okay,
any
so
other volunteers?
this website is takeouttracker.com.
Yep.
And if the two of you are able to spearhead that, that'd be great. And then if you could report back to us if you're able to get all of our restaurants added to this site.
Got it.
Great.
Thank you.
Catherine just raised her hand and said she's volunteering to help with Takeout Tracker.
Hi, Catherine. It looks like you are self-muted, but you do. There you go. I have you unmuted. And thank you. And now that you're actually live with us, thank you so much for you guys putting that together. And also, if you would tell us if there's any better way we can utilize the site that you all put together to either push or promote through your pantry site.
Yeah, I think there's probably an easy way to transfer a lot of that information because we have it stored on a spreadsheet that kind of feeds the information directly to our website. So I'd be happy to help coordinate or even help enter information.
Thank you, Catherine. So it looks like we now have 3 volunteers: Catherine Johnson, Councilmember Reitz, and Councilmember Rosengarten. Sylvia, I will now pass it over to you for staff and committee reports.
Thank you, Mayor. Is my screen showing okay? Okay. Administrative report, again, we continue with all of the COVID-19 information, and Austin is still putting out their situation reports about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I think they skipped a couple of nights last week. Most folks would have seen all of the work Chaska was doing on City Hall, and so right now we're in the process of testing to ensure that at least the rain garden anyway can hold water. There's a council agenda item later on that gives just a little bit more detail. Our safety of staff, you'll hear police chief make a comment about that. And we continue building the OpenGov budget builder so that we can get started on budget planning and budget modeling for the next fiscal year. I have Public Works meeting on next, and Carolyn is on.
Yes, Mayor and Council, good evening. So we've just been consistently keeping up with some of the essential duties, trying to keep all the roads and streets and everything safe and the trails ready for people to go on, and daily water things that we always have to address. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And what I'm going to do, just for the sake of time, is I'm going to let Sylvia get through her summary of the whole thing and then allow council members to ask questions of Sylvia or Carolyn all at the same time, because I think some council members will have questions about various parts of this. Is there anything else you would like to highlight, Sylvia?
No, other than we are still continuing. I know there's been lots of comments about our water system not protected. I want to assure everybody that we have staff members who are not only licensed, but have always carried the most licenses in the department and have run municipal water districts, not only distribution, but also treatment as well. So we have the knowledge base. We have been working on, not just since COVID-19, but even before, getting our other staff trained up with licenses. So I believe we are covered. I have police chief's report next, and then you're going to, I believe, open it up to comments. So Chief
Comment
is,
on all of it.
yeah. Chief, you're up.
And Chief, I just unmuted you so we can hear you now.
Right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's rare that I get to talk about crime in our city, but tonight I'm going to talk about a series of car burglaries that we're still experiencing. I think we're going into our second week of this a suspect or suspects that are targeting our residential areas, rifling through unlocked vehicles. I, so far, the suspect isn't getting anything valuable. There haven't been any reports of anything, but they are targeting vehicles. This has been going on all over Austin. There's some video of possible suspects, and we are spending our overnight hours trying to catch or persons. We will eventually catch them, but I do want to encourage residents, if you find that your car has been rifled through, even if you don't want to report, please give us a call so that we can keep track of when and where it's still going on. I also want to report that on the 30th of next week, the Central Texas Food Bank is going to be at Burger Center distributing food packets, and we'll have our reserve unit out there. I believe the last, at the other locations, they had about 1,800 people line up for food. So it'll be pretty busy, but we will have our reserve units out there for security or any traffic control that's needed. I heard Sylvia mention something about safety of our staff, and I did want to let everybody know that we have one officer out on self-quarantine with COVID symptoms. We don't have any confirmation yet. He has been tested, but we have no confirmation yet. We should know sometime this week whether or not he tests positive. But other than that, our staff is doing well. We're in good spirits, and we are ready for any uptick in crime or any calls that are come in during this COVID-19 period.
Thank you, Chief. And could you give the date again for the food pickup
That's
at Burger Stadium?
April 30th.
And that's going to be just for one day?
It's just for one day.
Okay. And so for that, in case this comes up as a question from council, we will, Chief will post that on his Facebook page so that people are aware of it. And then in one of our daily bulletins that we do between now and then, we will also make sure to recite that information. And Chief, I also would like to thank you. There was information that you created for me that related to understanding how many officers we have. This is a question that comes up from time to time. Thank you for creating the document that shows the how our officers work, how their schedules are different than all of our regular full-time employees. The main difference being that our police department works 24/7. And then I did notice in the Facebook, the one resident Facebook page that I go into from time to time, I noticed there were questions coming up from residents asking, has anything happened in terms of a reduction in staff? The answer is no for PD. And then if you would please just quickly summarize for us how many officers we have patrolling daytime versus nighttime, and whether or not there has been any change in that in the last few weeks.
No, we have 8 officers that are assigned to patrol, and we overnight patrol. We have, if everyone's here, up until the morning hours, we have 2 or 3 assigned to the city. Overlap. They work 10-hour shifts and they overlap. But up until 4 in the morning, we have 2 officers that are working every night in the city. After 4, it drops down to 1, and we have our lieutenant comes in early and supplements the 1 until 6 o'clock, from 5 to 6. So,
and if you would, you touched on it a little bit there, but if you would simplify it and retell us. How many of our officers, how many of them do patrol? Because sometimes there's a misconception too that we have officers who even you patrol at times, whereas in some cities your chief or your lieutenant or your other officer. So if you would also summarize that for us of which officers patrol and don't, and then if you would describe to us who you have in your department that's a non-officer, which is one. You have one civilian. If you would explain that.
That's right. We have one civilian employee who actually is a front desk clerk, evidence technician, and she's responsible for records. Then you have myself and the lieutenant. We cover admin, licensing, and a number of other areas that you have to have in order to maintain a police department. We back up and respond to calls. We have one detective who's responsible for investigations. He also responds to calls if we're short-staffed. We have two patrol sergeants who are responsible for supervision as well as some of our software maintenance. And then we have 8 officers, 4 assigned to each patrol sergeant. And again, the officers work 24 hours. The department's open 24 hours. The officers work 10-hour shifts. And so we try to maintain at least 2 officers on the streets at all times. And again, the only time that we don't have to is during the early morning hours. There's an hour period where there's only one officer working. But each officer is responsible for, all of the officers at the police department wear many hats. But everyone is responsible for covering calls if necessary.
And then I have 2 final questions. You just covered it, but to recap, how many of the people that work for you do work that's not patrolling? My understanding is that you only have one person, which is your civilian employee, and that everybody else, when needed, if needed, they patrol.
Yes, everybody is a police officer there, and we all patrol whenever we're needed. And even our civilian, in fact, during this COVID crisis, has been doing some security work over at the farmers market on the weekend. So, we utilize everybody that we have, and again, all but one are responsible for taking calls. And if we need any sort of special assignment, or often, the lieutenant and I will take over extra duties like the corridor cleanup, some of the homeless camp cleanups. Those are done by our officers who normally aren't on the streets, like the detective, myself, and the lieutenant. So we all pitch in and are responsible for crime control or order maintenance in our city.
Thank you. And then my last question is based on your report of the increase in both car break-ins, and then I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but we have had a few instances of packages being delivered and taken off of people's doorsteps. And I believe some, if not all, have been during the day. What advice would you give to the residents for what they can proactively do on their own properties to prevent this?
It sounds pretty simplistic, but if you have a garage, you might want to put your car in the garage until we catch this person. I could say lock your doors, but a determined burglar is going to break your car window. So it's there's 2 schools of thought on that. With this particular string of burglaries, the thieves are just riding through the car. So you're almost better off, in this case, leaving your car unlocked because you're not having to pay for a broken window. So my advice would be to, again, put your car in the garage if you can. If you have an alarm, a car alarm, turn it on. If you notice that your lights are on in the car, probably mean, especially at night, that somebody's entered your car. A few of the residents noticed that their lights were on before they realized they had been burglarized. As far as the mail thefts, I know the package thefts, excuse me. I know that those happened during the daytime. It looks like whoever the suspects were in that were following the Amazon truck around, and then after the truck make the drop off, they would just drive by and pick up the package from the porch. Again, those things right now, when you look at the police calls from the surrounding jurisdictions, there's a lot of that going on right now. I mean, we had this brief period when this all started where it looked like there was like everyone was kind of doing the right thing, but I mean, we all know that addictions and things like that have to be fed. So we're starting to see the beginning of what we're going to be dealing with crime. I would ask everybody to be a little bit more vigilant, but when you're seeing people that you think feeling that something's wrong or that maybe they're suspicious, don't hesitate to call us. No one's going to give any information on the caller. You can be anonymous, but we'd really like to try to get a jump on some of this activity. And it's going to take help from residents as well for us to catch these people.
And I know at Christmas time, the PD had offered an assistance where you could have your Amazon deliveries or other deliveries submitted to City Hall, but I assume that's on hold right now because of the
You can
COVID.
they can still do the deliveries at the PD. They can drop them into, or we'll take them inside. We're
Would you
always
just recap? Would you recap what that service is so that residents
Yeah.
know that they have that option?
Okay, our police department has been designated a safe trade station. And what that means is that you can either meet up there for if you want to purchase something on one of the online buying sites and between citizens where you sell or trade goods. You can use the police department as your address or your meetup spot. Or if you want to order something on Amazon, and as long as you make a note of who it's for, you order it, you can have it delivered to the police department, and then we'll call you and you can come and pick it up there.
And do you, just as a
Especially
curiosity,
good if
how
you're going to
often
be
has
out of
that been?
town.
Has that
It's
been
been
used at
used.
all?
It's been used a couple of times for residents that were out of town for extended periods. Used address as a pickup spot.
I'm now going to move to any of the council members who have questions related to any of the staff reports that you heard this evening. Thank you, Chief Carter. And I'll start with Councilmember Gonzalez. And it looks like you might be self-muted.
Can you hear me?
We can, and all of the staff members have open lines, so you can direct your questions to any of them.
I was actually back on the agenda with my hand raised, where you were discussing agenda items.
And that may be, thank you. And Karen may also have her hand up for that too. Yes.
Okay. So to back to that, is City Attorney on the call?
He is, and let me make sure he can speak. Hold on. Yes, Doug is now unmuted, and so any of the questions that anybody's asking can also be directed to Doug. But Doug, you are self-muted. So there you go. He can hear you now, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Okay, thank you. So I have recent information that I didn't know before that I kind of wanted to confirm with Doug because I got it from a different source. So Doug, it's my understanding that not only is a council member in terms of an agenda item in charge of the way the agenda item is framed, but a council member is in charge of the backup too. If they decide that the backup is sufficient, then it can go forward without the mayor deciding the backup is sufficient. Is that accurate information in terms of Open Meetings Act?
Open Meetings Act doesn't address that, but the council procedures ordinance does, and I'm looking at that right now. Any item submitted by the agenda for the agenda by a council member or the mayor must be preserved in its original form, may not be edited, censored, or altered in any way without the permission of the submitting party. Let's see. I don't think the ordinance addresses who has control of the backup.
Doug, would you cite the timing too? Because the timing part is always for me the tricky part with council members, which is if they want to be unilaterally in control, they can't submit it the day we're posting an agenda.
Yeah, the
11-day rule, basically.
yeah,
which
the 11
fine.
days. Yeah.
Yeah. That's clearly posted. I'm not concerned about that. It's just the other part that I would like everybody to hear.
Okay. Now I think that while the ordinance doesn't appear to specifically address who has the authority to submit backup, there would be, there's no authority of the mayor to refuse any council member, nor is there any authority of a council member to prohibit the mayor from submitting anything in backup. I don't, it being silent on who controls it, I don't think the council member who put the item on the agenda has exclusive authority to submit anything associated with that item.
Okay. I wanted clarity on our ordinance about that, just so that's one for. But also in the Open Meetings Act, there's no requirement for backup at all, right? You can submit it. I've heard that from another source too, that you can submit an item and you don't have to put any backup at all.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Right.
All right.
That
Thank
is
you.
correct.
I wanted everybody to hear that. Thank you. That's all I needed.
Okay.
Councilmember Medicus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one response to something you brought up in your report, and then I had a question, I think, for the chief about something else. So you mentioned the work sessions, and I would really like to see those continue until we have a recovery plan in place from the COVID-19 event.
So if we were gonna, let's just say you're the only person speaking on this, then I would look for other council members to agree or disagree or offer their comments. So if we're following what you're suggesting, Councilmember Medicus, it would be that we continue doing those. How far would you say?
Well, that's a really good question because we don't know when the restrictions are going to be lifted on COVID-19 and when we're going to have a recovery plan in place.
So maybe we could say at least through the end of May.
I would say that would be a good time frame for us to get a handle on where we're going from this event.
And so if we were going to do that, today is the 21st, so that would give us a work session on the 28th.
Correct.
And Sylvia, if you would interrupt me if I'm wrong on this, because what I'm hoping to do is to add these dates to my dashboard so that I know the additional work that you and I are required to do for posting. So this would be a work session on the 28th in between the regular action meetings on the 21st and the 25th. And then as we look to May, it would be the 12th and the 26th.
Correct.
And so, Councilmember Medicus, that would be three. That's sort of us committing this evening to 3 additional work sessions.
Correct.
Okay, and that's helpful to me because it helps Sylvia and I scope what work we need to do near term.
Okay.
Just on that one topic, and then I want to come back to you, Councilmember Medicus, for our other council members in the room. What Councilmember Medicus is proposing, which is helpful to me because it's at least clear parameters, would be that we do an additional SITREP situation report, COVID-based work session, and those work sessions could contain different things for each of those meetings, but that we would commit this evening to 3 more, one on April 28th, one on May 12th, and one on May 26th. Is that correct, Councilmember Medicus?
Correct.
Okay, and then council members in the room, if you would please raise your hand just for this one topic, if you have additional input. Councilmember Reitz, and Councilmember Rosengarten.
Yes, I don't have a problem with having the 3 meetings if they're helpful. I think we can kind of gauge that as we go along at the end of April to see if new information is continually coming in that we need to revamp or do whatever we need to do. So I think that's important. So I don't have a problem with that. Thank you.
Councilmember Rosengarten, you have an open mic, and Councilmember Ellett, you also have a hot mic.
I also agree. If someone needs a work session to discuss something further, then I'm for that. We will probably have a finance meeting on the 30th. It would just be nice to know ahead of time what is going to be on that discussion, and they don't have to be long if there's no new information.
That's true.
Councilmember Ellett, did you want to add to this particular conversation?
Yes, if I may. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, I don't have a problem with this at all. I just got 2 questions. One is, how much more information will we be getting as a result of the implementation of open.gov that may supersede some of the things that may happen, or information that may be conveyed in this meeting, number one? Number two, I'd like to get clear in my mind what the objective is. I'm all for this, but I'd like to be able to articulate what the objective is concisely. And if it's to educate the residents, I'm all for it. I really am. So those are my 2 questions.
Okay, and then I think this would be something for everybody to offer their input if they do. The way that I would answer your question, Councilmember Ellett, based on conversations I've had with Sylvia and Councilmember Medicus, would be, for example, the next work session might not be focused solely on budgetary presentations like the last one. The notes that I have on my list for additional work sessions would be short, mid, and long-term goals for the city, new resident initiatives, so reporting back on what resident initiatives are happening, who's the point person, and what progress they're making, a list of essential services, and a list of current projects and programs. So sort of continuing those conversations, because those are things that might be too much to get through in a regular council meeting, and it might be helpful in our non-action meetings to spend time talking about that. What is essential? What is non-essential? What are the actual projects and programs that we see going forward this fiscal year and as we build next fiscal year's budget?
That is actually quite helpful to the budget committee. So as we go through with that.
And I would certainly look to Councilmember Medicus on this if she has other thoughts, but that would be my running list of things that might be helpful to talk about in greater depth in a work session format versus an action-based council meeting.
Yes, Mayor, I agree. And also, one of the things that I've been getting questions about from some of the different committees is how do they move forward in getting ready for the budget session for next year? What information should they be looking at? What should they be thinking about? How do they move forward, and what role do they play?
Thank you. Great addition. Okay, council members, is there any additional input on this? And so what I have based on this discussion is that I will tentatively on my agenda planning add a work session for 428, 512, 526. Of course, at our action meetings, you all could decide to cancel any of the latter of those 3, but that Sylvia and I will prepare that we will be planning those additional agendas back up and postings.
Councilmember
Any
Reitz.
additional? They all have hot mics. So council members, you all have hot mics unless you, I think.
Well, I just wanted to add another, I needed to add another agenda item, but I didn't want to, didn't know if you were finished with this, so.
No, go ahead. I've got the document open. So if there's another item you want to add.
Yes, I would like to see somewhere in June and July to add I think it's time that we do a bit of a deep dive into the utility fund and look at what is termed the subsidies, look at the budget assumptions that are built into that budget, and understand what that budget is all about and present it in a clear fashion that our public understands it very clearly. Because I think there's some misconceptions out there about that, and I think that would be important to do. So, and I'm thinking somewhere in the June timeframe.
So right now, just as you were saying that, I've tentatively typed it in for June, the June 2nd meeting. Sylvia and Councilmember Reese, while you're both on the line, would you all discuss if that's the best date or if you think it needs to be moved up or down from June 2nd?
I think June 2nd is fine, depending on how heavy the items for the 5th and the 19th are. And I think that's going to really depend on how fast we get the budget up and running, but I think June 2nd is fine.
Right, because this will require a bit of Regine's time, and so I wanted to make sure, because I know she's involved in a lot of things right now, so.
Great, and Councilmember Reese, I would ask that you look at so I've added that to the agenda planning for June 2nd, and I've tentatively worded it as utility fund budget assumptions presentation sponsored by admin and REITs. And so if you want to revise that outside of this meeting, if you would email me and I will update it as you direct me to do.
Okay, thank you.
Wanda, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Reeds. Why not have that on a work session first before it goes to council?
Well, the thing is, I need to get into the weeds in this one. There are some budget assumptions built into that, and I need to understand where they came from, and that's some pretty involved conversations. Now, and once I get through that and understand it clearly, and then I think we can add it to a work session if that's a preference. So
Then I would recommend that if you have it on a council meeting, that you make it just a presentation, not an action plan.
Yes, it would be just a presentation. I mean, I think people need to understand what that is about. I mean, we use the term subsidies, we use numbers associated with that, and I'm not sure everybody really truly involves what all is involved with that. And so I think it's important that we kind of break it down. So it would be just a presentation. I don't think any decision needs to come at this point out of it, but the first step is understanding it.
Thank you.
And just from listening to the two of you, I clarified that on my dashboard, it says presentation, no action.
Yes.
Council members, you all have hot open mics. And so if any of you want to speak to this, specifically agenda planning and our work sessions.
I'd like to speak to that. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Gonzalez.
I want to speak to Councilmember Reetz's item because I've been working on it a long time, and I probably have a whole lot of stuff in my old emails, and before she partners with anyone else, she should at least have that information, and I can get it to, if she's already partners with someone else, then I can get it to the city administrator. If she wants to work with me, I'm happy to work with her on it. I'm just putting that in open session before we have anything else go on. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Madam Mayor?
Thanks.
Councilmember Reeds.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Gonzalez. I appreciate that. I have spoken with somebody on that. So I think it's probably a commitment at this point. So, but your information is really critical. And so I probably need a methodology.
I'll forward it to the city administrator.
Okay, okay. So that okay, that will work. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll make sure it gets distributed.
Perfect.
Okay, any additional discussion, input, or thoughts for adding these 3 work sessions for 28, 5/12, 5/26, and then I'm also It would be incredibly helpful to Sylvia and I if council members would be clear about what they want on the 5-5 agenda, as we will now, you've multiplied the demand on Sylvia and I to post complete agendas, because we're now going to be having called meetings every week. So anything where council members can be clear about what agenda items they want to sponsor specifically for 5-5, because that's the agenda we would like to finish this week.
Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yes, Councilmember Ellett.
I think based on, first of all, thank you and thank Karen, Councilmember Medicus, for detailing in greater detail the objectives of that. And I also echo the comments that were made by Council members Reitz and Rosengarten. So yes, I think these are a good idea, and yes, I will support them, and I think be happy to participate.
Thank you. And I did the same call out at the meeting last Tuesday, which was, please, while we are on open record, while we're all in the room, council members, could you please tell me what you want to sponsor for May 5th? I beg you, please don't email me or try to incorporate me into convoluted postings midweek. If you know that there's an item you want to sponsor for May 5th, please just talk about it in open forum right now. And so with that, I do have placeholders. I have 3 placeholders for Councilmember Ellett. Councilmember Ellett, do you perceive that you're still going to sponsor all 3 of those items?
I'm sorry, the answer is yes.
Okay, great. And Councilmember Gonzalez, I have that you are tentatively sponsoring 2 items. Do you want to keep both of those or remove either of them?
I don't have a visual, Mayor.
So I kept them vague because I wasn't exactly sure what you might want to sponsor. One is HR authority item, and then I just have holding for exact language from you. The other is health and safety, also holding for exact language. So would you like to clarify while we're together what you would like? And I believe Sylvia has also put it up on the screen so everybody can see it.
Yeah, I got it.
What would you
Thank
like
you.
to
Yeah,
sponsor?
you can. That's fine for purposes of right now.
Okay, and then council members, for all of these items, if you, and absolutely to the point that Councilmember Gonzalez made a few minutes ago, if you know you don't want my help, you don't want Sylvia's help, you don't want Doug's help, you want to truly sponsor an item completely on your own, you can do that. Please, if that's what your intention is, just simply say that. Send an email to Sylvia and I that says, I wish to sponsor this. This is the agenda language. I have attached my draft cover page. There is no backup, or I've included the backup. Make it so that we understand you don't want our help. And so for all of those items, council members, if you could please have your complete information submitted by Friday of this week. If not, I will be bumping it to the 5/19 meeting. My wish is to not work on your agenda items over the weekend.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, Sylvia?
No, it wasn't me.
It's Karen.
Kara, yes, sorry, Councilmember Medicus.
I just had a question on the JDRF presentation. Since this is an event, is that still going to occur?
So they had requested that. That's a great question. Thank you, Councilmember Medicus. They had requested that, and that is something that they had done from year to year, which is they come to us and they give a presentation on, this is what our numbers were last year. They kind of just give us a summary of what their previous year event was. And the reason I believe they do that is it's their way of lobbying us in front of the budget discussions. It's their way of saying, this was a great event, we want to stay here. So they come and they present to council, and then a few weeks after that is usually when they present to budget and finance for whatever their requests are. It's also around the time of year when they submit their special use permit, which is separate from their hot fund request. They did request to do it a few weeks ago and we bumped it. And so they have requested that date.
I'm just curious because we don't know where we're going to be with events and capability for large.
We don't know where we're going to be with events. They're wanting to do an event, I believe, Sylvia, you could correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's in November.
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
And they want to do their event regardless of if we give them hot funds. So similar to the farmers market, a very small portion of what we contribute to JDRF is in the form of hot funds, but they have made it very clear every single year that they want to do their event. They want the special use permit and the date holder, even if we are not giving them hot funds.
Thank you.
Council members, while you all have hot mics, are there any additional questions related to agenda planning before we move back to staff reports? And so, Councilmember Gonzalez, based on your comments this evening, it's my understanding that you will be submitting up to 2 items for the May 5th agenda and that you do not want assistance or review from Doug, myself, or Sylvia in preparing the backup or the cover page for those items. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Thank you. Council members, anything else? And then I would move to the next question, which is, do any of you have questions for Carolyn, the chief, or Sylvia related to their staff reports? And you all have open mics, so you all can jump in as you see fit.
Okay, Mayor, this is Councilmember Medicus again. I had a question. I think it's for the chief. With regards to providing support for the food bank. I had a question about the COVID testing that's up at the Burger Center. Is that been busy? Are we providing support for any traffic control or anything for that?
No, it hasn't been very busy. I mean, it's been steady, but there hasn't been any traffic or any standing vehicles waiting. It looks like probably about 1-2 cars an hour going through there. I have yet to see more than 2 cars there at the same time, but that could be because it's by appointment only.
Okay, thank you.
And we watch it overnight. We patrol it around there overnight. That's what they've asked for us to do.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Council members, you all have open mics. Are there any additional questions related to any of the portions of staff reports this evening? Public Works Administration or PD? Sylvia, I know the answer to this, but could you please provide an update to the meeting related to the dam application that was submitted?
We don't have a response from FEMA yet. I sent a request today for information, so I don't have an ETA as to when we would get a response to that.
Are you saying there is no dam update?
No, ma'am. The application was submitted, it was accepted. I don't know about award yet.
Okay. No dam update, darn it.
I got the pun, I just didn't want to.
Any other questions for staff? Council members, I have 3 things that I'm going to have Sylvia email to all of you this evening. One is the information that was referenced tonight. Chief did a high-level summary of it, but it's the more detailed report that he created for me that shows the shift information and the disbursement of his officers and what they do. And so I'm going to ask that Sylvia forward that information on to all of you so you have it. The other two items are memos created by Doug. One, I was under the understanding that it was something that Councilmember Gonzalez might have wanted, but regardless, he's done the work. And so I want to make sure that the information he created is shared with all of you, which relates to well, I'll let you read his memo, but it relates to department heads versus co-department heads. And Doug, you have an open mic if there's anything you want to add to what is produced in that memo.
No, I don't have anything to add.
Great, thank you. And then the second memo from also is one that I'd asked for Doug to put together, and I asked him to put as little time as possible into it, but it was to get in front of questions I had started to hear from residents and specifically from the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, which was just brainstorming what are different options we might have as a community for helping the retail district. And so that memo summarizes all of the questions that were requested, which were, is there anything we can do to defer quarterly taxes or to basically play with the revenue to allow the retailers to change when and how they submit those payments. And then the other one is there a quick and easy way to do an interim reduction to sales tax? Again, none of these were based on council having voted that they want to do these things or even indicated that they want to. The idea was to get legal to weigh in on if it's even possible before we go down a bunny trail chasing an idea. And Doug, similar to the last memo that I just summarized, if you want to add anything, what I believe is that your answer to all the questions was no, none of these things are easy or allowed by law.
Yeah, that's a summary that there's no tricky way to do it, but Chapter 380 Economic Development Program could probably accomplish anything the city might want to do.
Thank you. And so all three of those documents, those three separate documents, will be emailed to all the council members this evening. You can then use them as you see fit within your committee discussions or as you sponsor agenda items or deliberate in our work sessions or upcoming council meetings. Last call for any questions from council members related to any of the staff reports. We will now move to item number 4, which is council consideration of agenda items for approval on consent. Councilmember Rosengarten.
I move to approve agenda items number 5, the April 7th and 14th minutes with the corrections, and agenda number 7, emergency services draft.
We have a motion to approve on consent items number 5 and items number 7. Do we have a second from one of our other council members, which will open it for discussion? Councilmember Medicus.
I don't, oh, so you need a second for us to discuss it?
Correct.
Second.
Great. We have a motion and a second. Councilmember Medicus, would you like to remove or add to that list of 2?
Yes, I'd like to remove 7.
Item number 7 has been removed. We now have a motion and a second to approve on consent item number 5. And as a quick reminder, I'm going to ask that all of the council members via the chat box submit their, and Councilmember Gonzalez, I see a comment from you. I don't typically look at the chat information, but I do see that there is a objection from you. And so I want to make sure that we've captured that. I don't see you. Councilmember Gonzalez, you have the floor. Does your objection capture which was to pull 7?
I want to pull 5 and I want to pull both of them. And so, but I haven't been able to unmute.
Great. So you would like to pull item number 5?
Yes.
Great. So we now will not have any council consideration for items for consent. So we will move past item number 4. We will now move to item number 5, which is approval of the minutes from April 7th, 2020 regular meeting and the April 14th, 2020 called meeting. And Councilmember Gonzalez, since you have the floor, if you would like to submit your input on those two agendas.
Okay. On the meeting for number 7, on the 7th, I would like to request that all the citizen comments get attached to that, to those agendas. And I had seen it written that was going to be happen, but I didn't see it here, and so I want to make sure that happens.
And are you referring to the comments that were submitted for the April 14th meeting, or are you referring to the comments that were submitted for the April 7th meeting?
Oh, I'm sorry. On the April 7th meeting. Things. No, sorry. On the April 7th meeting, yeah. Not 14th is the comments I'd like to have attached. On the 7th, part of the I want to note that part of the people's comments are not being recorded in terms of, because I spent a long time listening to all the minutes live, and on the record is not showing at least 2 people who spoke. And so that's a concern for me, that we're not having complete minutes. And I wonder if this is a place where we can note that the insufficiency of notes, because Councilmember Medicus and I took a couple of actions about this, and they're just disappearing off the face of the earth. And so I kind of don't want them to disappear off the face of the earth, registering our objections to that meeting.
So let me break this down to make sure that we're capturing what you're stating. First is to include written comments for both April 7th and April 14th, that any comments submitted by residents be attached to both of those meetings.
Sure.
Okay. And then the second is, and I want to make sure we're using the correct vernacular. The minutes are not the same thing as the recorded record. So the minutes are a summary that gets adopted. That's what we have before us right now. That is not the same thing as the recorded record. Are you saying that you believe there's deficiencies in the minutes or the recorded record?
In the recorded record and in the objection to the minutes that are not captured anywhere, which I think is, the objections to the meetings, which is sort of to the minutes, that are not captured anywhere. And so those are 2 items that I'm concerned about.
And Doug and Sylvia, you both also have the floor with Councilmember Gonzalez right now. If you want to help make sure that we capture what Councilmember Gonzalez is wanting.
No, I think I heard her say there are citizens who made comment that are not listed here.
Let me start. No, the audio recording, we often refer back that the minutes are just the minutes, and that the audio recording will have the full testament. I'm just saying that the audio recording is deficient in at least 2 minutes that are recorded cases. So I just think that should be noted, that we're not capturing everyone who's speaking. So that's one item. But the other part is, when people ask to be read into the record on the 14th, I want their comments to be captured because they asked for that, and so I'd like those attached to the minutes.
So the
maybe
audio,
we can retroactively do OpenGov for something for that.
So Councilmember Gonzalez, if I'm understanding that correct, you're saying that the go-to meeting is recording all, but that you believe there might be a subjective control that's occurring that's taking out some of the comments?
No, I'm saying it started late and it's missing. And I don't know if anything else. I haven't listened to the entire meeting, so I don't know if there are any other missing parts, but I can tell you that the beginning is missing.
Oh, yeah, it started like about a minute. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so when the meeting started, that's what you're referring to, Councilmember Gonzalez?
That's what I'm referring to. That because there are two residents that are listed in the minutes that are not in the audio, and there's reference back to them as you listen to the recording, and it's not there.
Sylvia, only you can.
So I think that was my comment. What's on the screen right here says citizen comments, Dr. Browning, Liz, Mark, Clayton, Sasha. You're saying on the recording somebody has spoken and they're not listed here?
No, I'm saying people who are listed, you can't hear them.
Okay.
So
Regine,
the
I
first
see
two
that you
people
have
are
your-
missing.
I see that the city secretary wanted to speak. Regine, if you unmute yourself, you can speak also. We can hear you now, Regine. Regine, we can't hear you right now. If you wanted to speak to any of these, since some of this falls under your role as city secretary. So Regine, Sylvia, and Doug, if you could please, while we're on this item, help extract what it is that Councilmember Gonzalez needs corrected.
I think she's
Well,
saying the recording started late, and some people that are referenced here, she couldn't hear on the recording.
Accurate.
Yeah, and so I think the what is being moved is to append to each of the minutes of the 7th and 14th the written comments, and then as for any missing comments on the audio, I don't know if there's a way to include a note on the audio. I suspect not, and so perhaps a way to address that is to include just a note in the minutes that the audio is not a complete recording of all that was said at the meeting. And that would that address everything?
That'll address
Councilmember
most
Gonzalez?
of it. Yeah, that will address most of it, except for the part, Doug, that there were 2 actions taken about the April 7th meeting, and they just disappear from anybody's awareness if it's not documented somewhere. What is the best way to document such things?
Oh, you're saying actions are not included in either
I'm
the
saying
audio
that a notice of insufficient notice was sent, and there's no documentation of that anywhere. And you made a judgment about that, but there's no record for anybody else to know that happened.
I'm
okay,
now
and
lost.
that
We're
was
talking about Doug making a judgment. What are we talking about?
well, and I think that someone suggested that there was insufficient notice for council action, and I guess I said no, I think there is. But what I don't understand, Melissa, is are you saying that somebody submitted a statement in writing that there was
Right.
a bad notice, and those writings are missing?
Right. The 2 council members submitted that we thought there was insufficient notice for an agenda item, and it was, and we put that in writing, and nowhere is that noted, and I never
noted because that came after the meeting. That would be why
Right.
it's not noted.
No, I'm clear. I'm clear there, and I'm asking for a process where that gets noted somewhere. We can note it in this meeting, and I can just say it, and we can minute it. But I'm just saying, I was curious how a process for that would work.
Doug, so what she's saying is that there was I think what she's saying is that there was an email from Councilmember Medicus, which Councilmember Medicus, it would be helpful if you speak for yourself here and not have Councilmember speak on your behalf, and that Councilmember Gonzalez want to have noted on the record somewhere that they submitted a claim or a position that there was insufficient notice. You have made a judgment independent of that you believe there was sufficient notice. I think the question here is which set of minutes does that get added on? Which I would say it gets added on to tonight's meeting because tonight is when we're discussing it.
Well, we're only discussing the minutes now. If there is going to be a future agenda item that includes a review of whether there was proper notice, maybe that would be the right time to do it. Maybe we can't predict what will be on future notices. So I guess the motion would be to also include the objections to the sufficiency of the notice submitted after
For
the
item
meeting
7.
as as an appendix to the minutes for that meeting.
So I will step back and let you and Councilmember Gonzalez decide. And currently we don't have a motion on the table, but the idea is we're trying to approve the minutes from the April 7th and April 14th meetings. So
This is Councilmember Rosengarten, and I'd like to interject.
Yes.
Agenda item number 10 will play to April 7th meeting. Tonight's agenda item number 10.
Yeah, so right now we are just on item number 5, which is approval of the minutes from April 7th and April 14th. It is clear to me that the first, although we don't have a motion on the table, approval of both of these would include the addition of all of the resident comments that were submitted for both of those meetings.
Yeah, yes, I understand.
Councilmembers, do we have, could a councilmember raise their hand if they want to make a motion to at least
I'll make
get
that
us to
motion,
where
Mayor.
we can? Great. So we have a motion from Councilmember Gonzalez. Do we have a second, which will open it for discussion? Councilmember Medicus?
Second.
Thank you. And so now Councilmember Gonzalez has asked that all of the written comments submitted by residents be included in the minutes for this for April 7th and April 14th, according to how Doug recommends doing that.
Regine just made a comment that we need all of those emails. We don't have really any history of who got what. We know what we received, but if any other council members received anything, we need those.
Doug, do you want to provide a clear way to approve the minutes this evening, or would you recommend that both of these items come back on a later agenda when that has been provided to the city secretary?
Well, no, because those communications are public information, so they ought to be in the hands of the city secretary anyway. I think probably there is there's no later information that would add to this discussion. As I understand the motion, it is to append to the minutes of the April 7th and 14th meetings all communications received either by the city secretary or by any member of the council from citizens before or during that meeting. Is that a good way to describe that, Melissa?
Well, it's just the ones who asked to have their comments read into the record and didn't. I don't think we need to have all of them, but any of the ones that asked to have their comments read into the record.
As indicated on the writing that they submitted.
That they submitted,
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And Doug, you think it is appropriate for us to approve this evening, even though we don't have that information in front of us? So it is okay for council members to vote to approve the minutes, including that additional information, even though it's not provided in the backup?
No, because it's a clearly identified set of information that is public information, unless there's a question about, what was something actually received by a council member. It's going to depend on every council member providing to Regine whatever communications they received that included a note, I want it read into the record. So no, assuming no confusion is possible, I think everything is sufficiently identified that the council can vote. And as for whether I recommend, I don't recommend anything. It's an appendix to the meetings. It's not a record reflecting the deliberation or the action by the council, but it's not inappropriate to include it as an appendix to the minutes.
Councilmember Medicus and Councilmember Gonzalez, are you happy with that portion of the amendment to the motion?
Yes.
Yes.
And then Councilmember Gonzalez, was there something in addition that you want to add in relation to an objection to notice on item number 7 for the April 7th meeting?
I'll take Doug's recommendation on how best to note that.
Doug?
Well, that could be included in the appendix to expand the scope of not only what was just described, but also objections to the sufficiency of the notice submitted by any council member within the day or two after each of those meetings.
Okay, so added.
Agree.
Councilmember Medicus? And then the only thing that I would suggest, if we're going to add that it also include that Doug also provided his city attorney position, which was that he felt there was sufficient notice. How do we do that, Doug? Okay, Councilmember Gonzalez, that's fine. Councilmember Gonzalez has said that that's fine, and the second agrees. Are there any other comments from any of the council members? If so, please raise your hand. Councilmember Ellett?
Thank you. I guess I don't know if everybody else, or some people are as confused as I am. So let me ask a question of Doug. Doug, when we approve minutes as a council, what are we approving?
Your primary purpose is to make a clear record of the deliberation and the action of the council at the meeting. But you are not restricted to that. That's best practice to do that. And as I think I mentioned possibly last meeting, it used to be the city's practice to include an exhaustive rendition of every citizen that spoke at the meeting. And that's not best practice, but that's not entirely uncommon. So if your question is this even proper to do? The answer is it's okay. I guess it's neither proper nor improper. It's not inappropriate at all.
May I then ask you the question then, Doug? What would best practice be right now on this?
For instance, I think Melissa recited to a provision of the Code of Ordinances that could perhaps be interpreted more broadly, but I believe it was intended to allow a council member to include a dissent, either in written or spoken form, and make that part of the minutes. And so this is probably not unlike that. It's clearly a statement of dissent by two council members as to the sufficiency of the notice, and perhaps an adoption of whatever dissent was included in comments made by the citizens. So it's well within the ballpark of what the city's practice is with regard to protecting dissenting views in the minutes of meetings.
And in the proposals being put forward, the motions being put forward and seconded, are we as a council being asked to approve minutes which will include certain emails that some of us may not have seen?
You're not being asked to approve the content of the emails. You're being asked to include them as an appendix to the minutes, and they are separate from the minutes because they're not your deliberation and they're not your action. It's just a record of what citizens were commenting on matters before the council at that meeting.
Thank you.
Councilmember Reitz?
Yes, just for my education, I'd like to understand what constitutes insufficient notice. And Doug, could you perhaps comment on that?
Yeah, I can. And I want to say that I'm not sure I was asked. I don't think the issue was even raised in a public meeting, but I did speak with the mayor about this, that she had, some people had communicated challenges citizens had, I think, And I looked at the agenda then, and I'm not looking at it now, but the general language did not, it basically said something to the effect of, look for any way that we can cut costs in light of the drop in revenues. And it's not, clearly not best practice. Best practice is to give reasonably sufficient notice, but what is fair notice to the public as required by the Open Meetings Act can be considered in the context of circumstances, and the circumstances were widely known, and a notice on the agenda of potential cuts wherever they could be found. I gave the opinion to the mayor that that was sufficient notice in the circumstances. The general rule under the Open Meetings Act is you want to give fair notice to the public so that if it is a matter of concern to them, they know to come to the meeting and find out what's going to happen. You don't want them to not even know that something was going to happen that they would have liked to have been there to comment on.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional comments or input from council members or from the public before we call the vote? Council members, if you would please submit your vote on this item via chat. This is item number 5, which is approval of the minutes from April 7th and April 14th with the inclusions added by the motion maker in the second. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. And City Administrator Sylvia, when you have all of the votes, if you would please read them back into the record.
Okay. Councilmember Rosengarten, yes. Councilmember Medicus, yes. Councilmember Gonzalez, yes. Councilmember Reeds, yes. I'm waiting on Councilmember Ellett. Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. This moves us to item number 6, report regarding update on repair to the water quality pond as part of the city facility project, including change orders and cost impact. And Sylvia will be leading this item.
Thank you, Mayor. As I alluded to earlier, there has been a lot of activity at the city facility as they peel back some of the biofiltration layer to expose the clay, the addition of some bentonite. And I do want to thank Mr. Carmona for some of the preliminary work that got us here. Mr. Carmona had pointed out some deficiencies that were perhaps at one point glaringly obvious that were looked over. And as the testing has begun, those deficiencies have absolutely been on point. So what's included in your packet is emails that go back and forth over how they're going to take care of things and what. I want to go to the diagram to show exactly where the issue is. So this is the what we call the rain garden up on top. It's the area that is right adjacent to the police department and the police department parking lot. This area that shows 681, 682, 680, all of that is what we call riprap. It is white rock. So Mr. Carmona had previously noted that the full elevation level is about 1 foot over that riprap, and that riprap is not watertight. So as they attempt to fill, it comes in here and it absolutely falls down and goes to a place we've yet to determine. The other issue that we found as we peeled back was again a Mr. Carmona discovery as he had pictures. There's about 1 foot of clay that's missing here. When you see the line that says 9536, there's about 1 foot of clay that isn't there. So that's also allowing water infiltration directly into the soil and beyond. At one point there was a change order this front wall was supposed to be where the curve is here, the front wall was supposed to be a solid concrete, a solid wall. There was a decision made that that was aesthetically not pleasing, and so that wall was changed to a stacked stone wall. The stacked stone wall was not watertight, and so what ended up happening is they tried to test and water was seeping everywhere, and so they came in and exposed the wall and sprayed the same thing that you would basically spray inside a swimming pool, shot creek is what they call it, and made this area watertight. Well, what we've discovered is they made the front part of the curve watertight, but they didn't do the sides. So as you attempt to fill, obviously water is going to be seeping here, which is the side closest to the villas neighborhood, and water seeping on the other side, which is closest to the City Hall parking lot. So the change orders that have been received, part of it is because the wall change order was something that was initiated by staff because it was just not aesthetically pleasing. And the addition of concrete to seal that wall. So that change order to make those corrections while they're in there is about a little under $9,000. There was some issues with calculation. The change orders are going to be under $10,000, and that's expected to come out of the city contingency portion. The pond so far, they've filled it up. You need to absolutely saturate this material in order to determine how much water can be lost. It did lose water. I think our last email today that we got from Travis says it was within an acceptable margin as of this afternoon, but they were going to continue to test and monitor it again in the morning. So we should have better information on whether the rain garden at least was able to pass the test by the end of this week. The water quality pond, they're not done with that section. There are some pumps and some water pumps that they tried to run today and yesterday that are still not working. So they're going to have to go and troubleshoot those again and try to figure out what is causing the breaks and what is causing the pumps to not be able to prime and irrigate the system. So we're smack dab in the middle of all of that, and I anticipate the council and the residents will be seeing Chasco crews and other crews on site for the next couple of weeks. Any questions?
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you. Mayor and City Administrator, have you guys looked at the comments submitted by Alfonso Carmona in the relationship to this meeting? And I believe he might have sent a letter to people as well.
Yes, and yes, he submitted that email to us. He also posted it, so it'll be part of the minutes when we adopt those. And I don't see him. I see Aneshka. Don't see Alfonso, but I'd also ask that he be in this meeting if at all possible to answer any questions. And Aneshka, are you able to speak as a proxy for Alfonso? Is he going to be available to answer questions?
Hello.
It's Alfonso. Okay,
Yeah,
so Alfonso is
you.
also in the room. Okay. Councilmember Gonzalez, and he's also here to those comments.
Okay.
So I want to say that I did check into Alfonso's letter and statement, and I got someone else who also thought it was a very good idea. And so I would like us to include his comments, which he is here now to explain, in our forward process. Go ahead, Alfonso.
Yeah, well, I am very, very happy that in reality Chasco took the initiative and they tried to work with some of that omissions than previously they had. I think that it's important now that this is only one part. So now we need to start looking the other part, that is how we would say the units, because we call units, operational units, the rain garden and the pond storm, they will be working together. So with this only, they are fixing something that they supposed to be building. But now, what is the purpose of this? And that is important. So with the purpose of this, they have to pass that test. So the first test that they are doing is when you have rain and all of that water is coming, and it's coming from the parking lot and it's coming from the street. So all of that water with contaminants that will go to the rain garden. And now that they seal the holes that they used to have, the water no needs to go more to the aquifer, because the purpose of this rain garden was to do a pre-treatment. So we will try to see for tomorrow if in reality that passed the test, the first part. And later with the pond storm, the big purpose is that this city, as environmental city, we are doing some use of the water. So most of the water we can reuse for irrigation. So that will be the next step. So if the pond is working with that level of water that we will have, we can start doing irrigation. Pay for pumps and controls, and some of them they weren't working. So if now they fix that, they need to teach our staff how that will work, because that's important. At this moment, most of the system is tied with the drinking water by some fire hydrant, but we will disconnect that, and they need to tie it with water that is coming from the pond. Uh, Something that is important is also the jellyfish. It's a new technology. They are filters principle. So our guys that they will be working, they need to be well trained. So in that way, we will have, if that will work, will be incredible. Will be top of the line. So, but this is only one part. So the next phase is then the engineers that they design, they need to start working with the staff, and they need to prepare the staff. And the designer, he needs to write a letter. Then he passed all of these according with the design, and he needs to submit that to Texas Water Development Board, TCQ, I'm sorry. So this is that I was looking. But we have to complete that with all of these kind of things that I sent in that letter. I was afraid when I saw the numbers with money, and because sometimes I feel that the guys that they are doing the construction, they are pushing because they want and they will have the money back. But if at this moment we pay all, we don't have all the things that they need to correct. So for me, the outside is not 100% substantial completion. And if there's no completion, the completion will be until they will do all of these activities. And after that, we can pay. So be watching that. And this is what I try to say. And thank you for allowing me to be working with that, Alfonso.
So Alfonso brings up a point about substantial completion, because we had one contractor this week ask for their retainage amount. And so Doug and I are going to have to work through those as they start coming in. Obviously, the current COVID situation puts all small businesses and small contractors more at risk. And so we have folks that are saying, hey, you guys have been occupying the building. We think it's substantially complete. And so we need to sit down with Chasco and determine how Chasco is going to handle some of those retainage claims, so that we don't end up with a lien against the facility.
And Councilmember Gonzalez, before I move to other council members, did you have any follow-up questions or comments?
I think there was an important point brought up here about the training of the staff, and I'm curious about, especially if Alfonso has any numbers or the city administrator has any numbers, as to what kind of liability we have if these are improperly maintained by staff. How much, if it's done wrong because of whatever reason, how much is it going to cost us if something breaks here?
Well, first of all, I will tell you that the software needed to be installed on a particular computer, and prior staff went and bought a used computer and installed that software on. 2, staff has never been adequately trained ever, because we've not taken control of any of the outside yet. It's never worked. And so to the point that there was an attempt to sort of just drop off construction manuals and give it to staff to learn it and live it and you know, do a quick walkthrough. We've made it very clear that that's not going to be acceptable and the staff does absolutely need to be trained. This is a very expensive system. Obviously, if it doesn't work, or if the levels of the water aren't intact, or there's some issue with contamination of the water, all sorts of very bad things can go wrong. So I don't think it's just a liability in terms of cost. I think it's a liability. We can make people really sick by irrigating really bad water.
Okay, I guess I would like to have a further presentation on what happens if things go wrong and what we need to do to keep it right. I think that's really important at this point. So I would like to have that presentation at some point. Thank you.
Sylvia, is that something that you can commit to now, or would you prefer that there be a council member that sponsors that to ensure that it gets followed up on?
No, I took that as a sponsorship item, that she's going to sponsor that item and we can push it through. I need to see how the test results end up, because obviously if the tests don't pass, we're not going to accept either one of the rain gardens. And so that would push out the staff training even more as they try to get the items fixed. So it's really dependent on how things go this week on how soon that item can come back.
Councilmember Gonzalez, you still are open on my end, but it looks like you might be self-muted if you wanted to respond to that.
Okay, am I understanding that I need to make an agenda item to have that happen? Is that what I just heard?
No, that you're going to work with me to sponsor an agenda item so that we can bring that to council.
Okay, that's fine. However that needs to happen, I just want to make sure that that happens.
And so Councilmember
I guess Mayor,
Gonzalez,
put it on an appropriate agenda for me, Mayor, and I will sponsor it.
Thank you. What would be a good date for that for both of you?
Probably the first meeting in June.
That's fine for me as long as it stays in the queue.
Great. I've added it as of right now, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you very much.
And we have a comment from Councilmember Ellett.
That was me. You were recognizing, Madam Mayor, this Councilmember Ellett?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. Hey, I just want to comment. I read Alfonso's email this morning, and I talked with him this morning at length. And first of all, I want to thank him for the hard work he put into that and the commitment he's made. And he did a great job of educating a lay person, as you would expect from a former educator. Two things came to mind that I think we need to focus on. One of them is, who is going to sign off on this? And the question that comes into my mind is that person has to be both independent and qualified. And we've heard, and we have a group of people who are the people who designed it and who built it, that probably would, if push came to shove, would come down on the side and get it approved because they want to get paid. But who from our side is going to have the degree of independence that can truly say it is completed, it is performing to spec, and has that competency to deliver that? I have questions about the competency of some of the people, because it's the same people that allowed us to get into the situation in the first place. That's the first question, or the first issue I see. The second one is, and I have to echo what Alfonso said, training is important here. From what I just heard the city administrators say, where, up until now, I've been dropped off the manuals, it's quite frankly less support and less training I got when I built my swimming pool from the swimming pool manufacturer. And so it is important we focus on that. It is important we have multiple people up to speed on that. And one of the questions I asked Alfonso, and he gave me a very good answer, is, do we have the skill set within our organization that will be able to absorb that and be able to practice that going forward? And the answer is from him, and I once he explained what was involved, I have to agree. We do have that skill set on board, and we do have the people that with that training can manage and maintain and support this going forward. So I wanted to make those 2 points, but the independent signing off on this to me is a critical item.
Council member, the sign off for us, the third party, is Miller Gray.
Okay.
So far, that's been Travis and anybody else within the Miller Gray organization. Travis has been on site watching the testing. Matter of fact, Travis is the one who raised the issue that there was no concrete here on the sides. And really truly verified what Mr. Carmona had been saying, I think from day one several years ago, between the riprap and the missing clay. That does not alleviate Wigginton, Sergeant Brinkley from also needing to sign off and put their seal and their errors and omissions insurance on the line for approving this in its finality.
Okay. Thank you. And just, I think there's two sign-offs we're looking for. Is that correct? One is to satisfy TCEQ, and the other one is to satisfy us that the repairs were done. Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand that correctly. Both of them are important, obviously.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you. And Alfonso, before we move to the next council member, did you want to speak to any of the items that have been commented up to now? And then the one thing I would like for you to comment on is the statement that Councilmember Ellett just made, which is that it's your belief that we already have staff on hand that have the ability to do the maintenance and training that we've been discussing.
Okay, look, Mayor. I think that at this moment, they are three important points. One important point is that we cannot allow to Chasco to get out. So at this moment, we have to prove first that everything is working. This is important. Now, if we have the third party, Travis, he needs to understand how that works and how he can transmit some of the training to our staff. Now, in our staff, because I hear before about people, you have at this moment one superintendent in water and wastewater, and that guy, he has a double license, be in water and be in wastewater. He's well qualified according with the license. So if they provide training to this person and you have other technicians, I think we can do very, very well. But you need to have somebody with a little more understanding. So if Travis is the person, he needs to be responsible. And if at this moment we accept this, the warranty that we will have, Travis needs to be behind that warranty. So if that will be 6 months or 8 months or 1 year, know that they finish the next week. This is my opinion. Thank you. Hello?
Councilmember Reeds?
Yes, and I would like to add to Sylvia and Councilmember Gonzalez's presentation is an inclusion of the actual training plan, and that would include all the training that's going to be done or has been done, all the personnel involved, any certifications, who is delivering the training and what their qualifications are, and all the time required with that. And if that could be a part of that presentation, included with the presentation that Councilmember Gonzalez requested, if Councilmember Gonzalez agrees.
Councilmember Gonzalez, if you could raise your hand. There you are. Councilmember Gonzalez, do you agree with that addition?
Yes, I'm fine with the most complete presentation we can manage, and I appreciate any and all additions to make it better.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, and while I have both of you on, so I've already added this to the 6-2 regular council meeting, and the wording currently says additional presentation on city facility pond, including maintenance, training plan, cost, and personnel needs for all items. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that descriptor?
Is there you mentioned qualifications of trainers and such?
I just said training plan.
Okay.
If you want to send that to the city administrator, so she has that captured where your concerns are, done exactly like you'd like, Councilmember Reeds, I think that'd be great. And that way we have it documented.
Perfect. I'll do that. Thank you. Thanks for your, the other, okay. Thanks.
Do we have any additional comments on this item?
Oh, I have.
Yes, Councilmember
So,
Reeds.
yes, so the other comment is in our cost. It appears that because we put in the change order, and it sounds like we didn't really quite understand at the time what that wall was to be, that it needed to be waterproof, that we will need to, that will be an additional 10,000 on our side. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. It's like only water sealing the deep end of the pool.
Right, right. So, okay.
And so that will come out of our contingency funds, correct, Sylvia?
Correct.
Okay.
And so this is really going back in time, but if any residents were to refer to my budget letter, which is linked on my dashboard, part of what we discussed in adopting our budget last year was that we were at 11.7 months of reserves without a transfer. And so later this evening, we are going to talk about potentially not adopting the transfer that was approved for this fiscal year. Another part of what we were counting on, or loosely counting on, was that contingency money. And so $10,000 isn't much, but I would imagine by the time we're done, that number will creep up. And so we need to also account for that, as residents are referring to the 12 to 18 months reserves. Just to remind residents, we do not have 12 months of reserves, and we are now dipping into the reserve transfer that we had thought we would have this year. Sylvia, is there anything else you would like to add to that agenda item?
No, that's all.
We are moving now to item number 7, which is presentation and adoption of the continuity of operation plan for the city of Sunset Valley. Sylvia?
Thank you, Mayor. So the continuity of operation plan is really just that. How do you continue operations in the midst of an event, whether it is a natural disaster or whether it is a pandemic or an economic disaster? Because staff, while we have a resilient and elastic staff, when we all move positions, when an emergency is declared, as the operation goes into weeks and months, we've got to switch off staff. We've got to cross-train staff. Staff moves in different directions. And so the plan is really to show what we have in place, who are our subcontractors or outside contractors who also pick up, and what are we actually doing during an event. So I go through that the administration department basically becomes, I'd like to call it a fine mist, where we're spread over all of the public works and public safety. We're ensuring that the meetings are still occurring. We're ensuring that people are getting paid, and we are providing support wherever able to both public works and public safety, who take really front and center in event situations. So I don't know how much council has attended NIMS training or emergency management training, incident management control training. But during that event, the mayor, as the CEO, is the one who receives the situation reports from the governor's office and from the state officials. The chief and I are tag teaming and receiving information. Chief is receiving from the public safety. I'm receiving from the local administrators and the health officials. And we are meeting daily, sometimes several times a day, to put those position reps together and distribute out. That's what you see in our daily bulletin. Travis County and the city of Austin are providing information, again, really late at night. And so that's why our bulletins go out really late, because we are often sometimes receiving that information as late as 10 and 11 o'clock at night. In many of the meetings, the mayor is the only one who receives an invitation, and that is specific to the governor's meeting. The mayor sometimes shares that information, and the police chief and I will jump on dependent on what the topic is. So this particular event has a health and safety focus, which is why public safety is at the forefront, and then public works between utilities and solid waste. So as we all take a step aside from what our normal operations are and we focus on that particular health and safety, then we really take a look at operations and say, from a minimalist standpoint, what are we legally obligated to provide in order to continue health and safety? And for public works, that is providing clean water, that is being able to flush your toilet, that is picking up trash, picking up brush, and any of those things that would be hazard to roadways. And for public safety, that is continuing to provide fire and police service as we can continue to protect the residents. We have interlocal agreements with a lot of agencies, from the Sheriff's Department to Austin Public Health, Austin Fire and Rescue, Travis County Health, and the list goes on. Austin and Travis County provide the vast majority of support, but during the process, we were also looking at interlocal agreements with our other small city neighbors. In the cities that I came from before, it was not uncommon for us to borrow or loan street sweepers to one another, for us to borrow or loan staff and equipment to one another, especially when it was time to clear streets or things like that after an event. So we're going to start with public safety. So the report is broken out into what is the staff composition and what is the organizational structure. And it focuses on what is the mission of the department and how does that mission continue to be served during an event. It gives you who the team is and who the order of succession is should something happen to the police chief. It provides a contact list and an external contact list for those agencies that are important for us to continue to provide service or how we would receive third-party equipment and supplies. Coupled with a vendor list, and then alternate sites. Should something happen to the police department building and we not be able to operate out of that building, what is our next building and what would we need in order to be ready to operate out of an alternate site? And those are things like portable radios. Nobody ever considers their chargers, extension cords, access to power, et cetera, et cetera. And then should something happen that the department not be able to continue operations, who's our devolution agency? And for us, it is Travis County Sheriff's Office. If the city of Sunset Valley would cease to be able to operate, then Travis County would come in and provide service. Chief has broken out his essential staffing plan into a blue team and a silver team. And this is should staffing levels reach a capacity of 15%, we would go to a compressed 12-hour shift with one officer minimum staffing. And this is really, especially in the midst of COVID, had we had an incident where staff was sick and we needed to either quarantine or self-isolate, then what was our staffing going to look like? All of this would be coupled with a communication plan. We would get this out to the residents and say, your calls may be delayed 10, 15 minutes, or your calls may be solely answered by Travis County, et cetera, et cetera. So Emergency Operations Center within PD, obviously, again, for those who have received incident management training, as we hit particular stages, there are certain pieces of the incident management structure that get opened up. In the beginning, when you're at the lower levels, we're really just at a communication level, and so it may be really just a skeleton crew. But as we begin to ramp up, as we are in stage 4 of COVID in the preparedness plan, we need operations, those who continue to run the day-to-day. We need logistics, those people who are getting things such as supplies, face masks, face shields, etc., making sure that we still have adequate deliveries, making sure that the roadways are clear for deliveries, making sure we have staff to receive the deliveries, and then admin and finance. And that's making sure that we're able to still cut the checks. Things are still running in the office. We're not going to be cut off of credit lines or those kinds of things to be able to receive what we need. I'm going to state that the administration finance, even though I keep saying we're sort of like a fine mist in the background, they become so critically important because those are the reports that we will be submitting to FEMA. Those are the reports that we submit to the state in any hopes of reimbursement for any of our expenses. And so the chief lists his patrol operations. What does that look like? And so we shift from proactive to just order and maintenance and a life-saving function. And so he gives that we will not be taking shoplifting calls, prior thefts, assisting EMS. Those are the very basic that we're going to handle when we have to go to a 50% staffing or some other level of staffing where we are running really almost a bare minimum skeleton crew. So the alert and notification, again, this is because police department and during emergency operations, we run on a paramilitary schedule. Who's next? How do you get the alert out? If there's a message that needs to go out, who has the ability and the authority to approve that message? And in Chief's case, it is he and his second in command, the lieutenant, that are able to give those clear mandates to go ahead and release information, or in this case, contact the IT department for additional 800 lines, etc. Again, activation. If we have to not only evacuate the residents or evacuate the staff, the chief and the lieutenant are those making the decisions. So then we go to Public Works and Environmental Services. And again, this staff the team is really made up of the 3 supervisors, Carolyn, Sam, and Daniel. The order of succession would be Carolyn, Sam, and Daniel. And our external contact list is just as long, if not longer, for Public Works. Austin Water Utilities, we have third-party contractors who help us manage our pumps, our fire hydrants, the people that we need to contact should we have any issues with water quality, our City of Austin, our third-party disposal systems, our underground water issues if we have anything with the well. Anybody that can come and help us clear Texascapes, Texas Gas for our gas lines, etc. So these are all what we call partners in an event. These are people that we have standing contracts or agreements with that would come provide assistance in the need of an event. Again, a listing of some of our vendors. For Public Works, the alternate site is the police department. Should something happen to the police department, our alternate site is Burger Center. And then should something happen to City Hall and Public Works, then we would turn to the City of Austin. Our memorandum of understanding with the City of Austin needs some development. It is not a complete, should the City of Sunset Valley have to turn over the keys for whatever reason because we don't have any more support, that memorandum of understanding needs quite a bit of strengthening. So again, similar to what Chief showed up at the top, should we go to 50% staffing, then we're compressed into 12-hour shifts, and then there's 2 staff at a minimum, and that's usually a supervisor and a maintenance tech. And then the supervisor, Carolyn, is split into 4-hour shifts. So she does a little bit with the blue team and she does a little bit with the silver team. And really, the purpose of the supervisor at that point is to help run logistics, make sure everything is running appropriately, the vendors are on notice, things are getting paid, and everything is running smoothly. So during, similar to what Police Chief mentioned up above, during emergency operation, Public Works is doing minimal duties, and that is really the mandates that are placed upon us by the public water system, by the TCEQ. We need to still flush, we need to maintain our valves, we need to still do line locates and cross connection to really protect the water supply. We need to continue to maintain the wastewater system. Our storms and drains still need to be clean. Our street maintenance still needs to be done, and that's really keeping trees pruned and cleared for physical obstruction. And then everybody forgets about traffic lights during an event, but those are probably some of the most critical items because if your traffic lights are not working, people don't just normally stop, and then that causes all sorts of other accidents. During an emergency event, staff is only patrolling trails once a week. And the trail patrol is really a shift between Public Works and PD. PD has stepped up and has begun helping with trail patrols. Public Works had stepped some of that up, and now we're ratcheting that back with the reduction of staff. We will maintain facilities. We will do just for the very basic health and safety. We're not going to be doing any significant repairs or taking on any new projects. We will still do dead animal removal. However, we're asking that the residents place the animal by the curb and we will pick it up. Obviously, our storage yard still needs to be open. We still need to keep things free from debris, especially if it was an ice storm or a windstorm or things like that, where limbs were on the ground and blocked our ability to get through traffic. The storage yard would remain open, but it would be limited residential use as we're trying to get staff to clear the areas. Forestry and irrigation is still required. It's, we need to maintain our fire breaks. We are a fire-wise city. And so we need to keep things trimmed, but things aren't going to be as neat and tidy should an event extend for any period of time. We have third-party contracts for vehicle and equipment maintenance. Right now, staff does a lot of the smaller equipment, but in an event, if we needed to offload some of that into third-party, we have the ability to do that. Plan review and development. Still, that would be Matt and I with some assistance from Carolyn. We would do that on a limited day and time for review, and that would be as determined by staff as those permits come through. And then obviously we still have council committee and external agency coordination that needs to happen. And in the public works area, any alerts or notifications, I'm the person assigned to make the determination of when we will release information after working with the mayor and she's speaking to the council, how information gets disseminated out to the public, in what manner and what method, to make sure that we are releasing clear, concise information, especially as it relates to residents' health. So quite a bit of information. I'll open it up for any questions.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you very much. I would recommend that that all the council members, if they have time, take the continuity course offered by FEMA. I did that mostly this morning. It's slated at about an hour, and it's really less than that. And I think that it would be really helpful because I think people might get some information about really what to prioritize during the pandemic. This continuity is like one of the first things we're supposed to be doing. And I'm really concerned because I think it does point out that we're not necessarily planning for a pandemic. And in a pandemic, one of the things that it says is that essentially it's going to disrupt 40% of the workforce because either they get sick or they stay home, take care of their loved ones. So that we should be planning for this particular thing, not a fire, not a flood, but for this particular thing, for a 20 to 40% reduction in workforce. So that part is really significant, that's the thing that in a pandemic we plan for, is a reduction in workforce. The resources that it also says in the next thing it says to do in this, it's a very established form that we're supposed to be following, that resources may not be available for mutual aid and assistance. And so those are the things that you should also be really paying attention to, that things that you think are normally mutual aid, you may not get because other people are being hit, and that we should rely on our internal resources even if they have been decimated by the flu. These are bullet points in this course that people can look at. The other things that we're really paying attention to are our utility structure and the redundancy in that. And if you look at our plan, does it have redundancy? Normally, we should be having redundancy at a level of 3 going down in the chain, and in case of a pandemic, it should be going to 5. We don't have that, other than in the police. That we should be looking at multiple waves of this, and so these kinds of events could be hitting us again in 2 or 3 times. So the clear lines of succession that are at least 3 deep, preferably 5, are really important. And then the random people that you pull out, like let's say the city administrator got pulled out, if we don't have significant backup for her, a whole lot of our plan falls apart. If we have the utility person come out, our whole plan falls apart. So that just pulling some random people is really significant in terms of your testing for how good this plan is or not. So those are just, I mean, I've got probably 3 pages, and I'm also really disturbed in terms of our own policies that we have phone numbers in this list, because that was very disturbing to me that got published publicly. And if there's a way for us to still deal with all those things should be pulled off the website. So I've got, I will pass this out, but it's really easily available on the web if anybody wants to see it. But at a minimum, the order of succession for the positions of the organization head, establish orders of succession for the key leadership positions, because legally these things need to be done ahead of time, or later on when we're short of people, we don't have the legal authority to do these things. And those are things that I think we should be talking to our general counsel about, even, orders of succession in our general counsel. So there's just a huge list that I don't feel like we're following, that is the FEMA dictated, and I want us to pay attention to that. Thank you.
Okay, before I move to the next council member, because I don't want there to be confusion later about what was just presented by Councilmember Gonzalez, could we get, it was a lot of words for me. Doug, Sylvia, is there anything you can say in response to Councilmember Gonzalez?
Well, she's absolutely right in that third parties may be decimated, which is why our third parties are also not just in our local agency third parties, but also third party vendors. The other issue is that, yes, our continuity of operations is 3 deep in public works and 4 when you add myself. And PD, he does have the required 5. The staffing plan, we take it to 50%, not 40. We went above and beyond that to make sure that we were covered in the event of people getting sick and not coming to work. So we took those things into consideration. This obviously is not, I'm open for any comments, any suggestions to the plan. So, please keep it coming.
Doug, is there anything you want to add before we move to additional comments from council members?
No, I have nothing to add.
And Councilmember Reitz, I saw your hand was up and then it went down. I'll wait to see if you put it up again. Council members, are there any additional comments? Councilmember Medicus? Councilmember Medicus, did you want to make a comment?
Oh, sorry. If the voice saying I was unmuted kicked in and I didn't hear what else was being said. Yeah, I think this is a good start. And I think that one of the things I didn't see in the order of succession was for the executive management team. And I think that's something we should include. And this might be something that if Councilmember Gonzalez has a list of bullet points from the FEMA website, then we might want to take a look at that in one of the work sessions as we build this out further. It would give us more time to go through those and think about them ahead of time and maybe go to the site. I was also concerned or wanted to know, I think later on we talked about cutting training, but I think it's important. A lot of the FEMA training is free. So I don't know how many of our staff are actually gone through NIMS or any of the FEMA training for pandemic.
Not enough. Not enough. And I would ask the same question of council. How many council members have actually gone through the NIMS training?
I know I have, but I think it's really critical because, especially with pandemics, because they viruses are cyclical. Mm-hmm. So while we're dealing with this initial onslaught of the virus, the cycle will be that most likely we have a second wave. And so we need to be thinking about that now, that we're prepared for that. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Councilmember Medicus. Councilmember Ellett?
Madam Mayor, thank you. First of all, I think the plan addresses a lot of just about all of the concerns I've heard. It is detailed. I think it's nothing stopping us from adding to it in the future or revising it as we see certain additions and should be needed. At this stage, I'd like to make a motion we approve adopt the continuity of operation plan as presented by the city administrator tonight.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? And I'm going to open up Councilmember Reitz. I'm not sure if that's why your hand was up, Councilmember Reitz, but would you like to second that motion to open it for discussion?
Yes, I'm assuming that this is a little bit of a work in process that it can be modified as circumstances present itself. So given that,
That is
yes, I would
correct.
accept that.
That is correct. So, Regine, City Secretary, we have a motion and a second to approve the COOP plan this evening. And yes, to both the motion maker, the second, and all of those attending, this would be a document that we would approve as needed. And I agree with Councilmember Medica's suggestion, which is we use the work sessions if there's additional portions that we think need to be added, or if there's ways that we want to look at our city because it is unique in terms of number of residents, amount of revenue, resources, which includes personnel, but also other factors, ways that we would adapt our COOP plan to be specific to our city's needs and resources. Councilmember Ellett, while you have the floor, and Councilmember Reitz, while you have the floor, is there anything else that you would like to add to this item before I open it to other council members?
No, I think that those comments you just made, I'm certainly in agreement with.
Yes, I just wanted to add, I thought this was a tremendous amount of work, and I compliment those who put in this effort. I think this was a necessary thing to do, and I think that's very good. Thank you.
Yes, and I can't speak to everybody's phone number that's listed on here, but I can speak to myself, Sylvia, and Chief. We very much consider ourselves part of the emergency management team for this city, and we consider ourselves to be available to the community 24/7. And I won't call out the resident that is in attendance right now, but there is at least one resident that can attest to the fact that I am often on the phone with residents very late into the night. Last night I was on the phone until 1 a.m. with residents.
Well, Mayor,
Councilmember Medica. Yes. Sylvia.
Oh, to that point, I had asked Regine about the city's policy, and I think there's never really been a policy in terms of what is posted and what isn't. And the fact that this is a plan that folks need to get their hands on to know who to call should, we be wiped out and nobody has the ability to do that. Plus, the city reimburses for those cell phones. So there is an aspect of public transparency for the cell phones.
And we do reimburse. Councilmember Medicus. It looks like you might be self-muted.
Sorry, got it. Well, I would just like to see the order of secession for the executive management team included in this draft. And I don't have a problem with any of the government cell phones. I think one of the residents, Kenton, had sent a letter, was concerned about, for example, the phone number, direct phone number for the principal of the elementary school. Okay, I'll look into that. But I would like to see the succession plan for the executive management team, because that's does it go to the mayor pro tem if the mayor's sick, or?
Councilmember Medicus, do you want that included tonight before we vote on this, or do you want that to come back at the next work session, which would be next Tuesday, as a first edition revision?
If it's simple enough, we could just do it now, but if it's not, then we can bring it to the work session.
Sylvia, I'll let you speak to that. Is that something you can add quickly on the fly now, or would you recommend that we bring that back as a first edition revision on for discussion 428 or for adoption on 5.5?
No, I'd bring it back for 428. That and to ensure that Councilmember Gonzalez, there's a couple of bullets in the FEMA that should be incorporated here.
Okay, so I've added that to the 428 and the 55. So it'll come back 428 for discussion of additional first edition revisions. If agreed upon by council, then we would adopt those revisions into the plan on 55.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ellett? And actually, Doug, I noticed that you had your hand up. You have an open mic, so at any point, if you unmute yourself, you can jump in as you see fit.
I was just going to add that if the city reimburses for the cost of a personal cell phone for a police officer who has submitted a written request that the officer's personal information, including home phone number, be kept confidential, then the city cannot release that. Most exceptions to the Public Information Act are not mandatory. The city can release information, but has the right to withhold it. This kind of information, if the officer requests that it be kept confidential, must be kept confidential, and the city can't release it. And I don't know the particulars, but if it's a case where an officer arranges for a personal phone, and the city simply provides a reimbursement benefit for that, that might be the equivalent of a home phone number that must be kept confidential. It can be used in a part of a plan.
Doug, I assume that would apply to myself and Sylvia as well. It's that we opt in.
Well, no, it doesn't apply to you all. It applies to mostly law enforcement types of people where it's a mandatory thing, not to a mayor or city administrator.
And so for the officers, just to be clear, so we're talking about Chief Carter, Lieutenant Andrucci, Sergeant Stern, Sergeant Early, Sergeant Wells. And so what you're saying is they would have to request to the chief that they don't want their information made public.
Well, no, if they did make that request, then you cannot publish their personal phone number. If they didn't make that request, then there's no mandatory obligation to keep it confidential.
Great. So Chief Carter, we're now talking about a very specific group of people. Have any of those officers made that request? Chief Carter, it looks like you're self-muted.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
You have the floor. Yes, we can.
I think that each of those officers, whenever they signed up for employment, filled out a form that all police officers can fill out that requests that their information be kept private. So I'm sure they all have filled it out. I probably have too. It's standard that you fill this form out that allows you to keep your information private.
Okay, and so for Chief and Sylvia, if you would confirm that for those officers, and if so, redact it from the version that's being adopted this evening, and then also make sure that it gets redacted in whatever gets posted for this meeting.
Will do.
And then Doug, could you please go back, because I want to make sure I understood that correctly. You're saying that the protection that's offered to officers is different than the protection that's offered to elected officials in the event that they feel that their safety is in danger related to their personal information?
Yeah, there's a separate exception that applies when a government employee believes the release of information would endanger the person. I think that is also an optional type of exception, not a mandatory one. So the city could keep it confidential. I'm looking at, let's see. Yeah, that is not a mandatory one either. So the only one where the city has an obligation and could be liable if it did publish phone numbers that were personal phone numbers. And I'm assuming, the facts of how the city reimburses, that depending on the particulars, that may make a difference whether it's a personal phone or not. But if it's a personal phone and the city only pays a reimbursement of the cost, the monthly cost, I think it should be treated as a personal phone, and phone number ought to be treated as mandatorily confidential unless the officer provides in writing an authorization for this specific purpose to include the phone number in this publicly published document.
And so, Doug, in the context of a plan of this sort, where I can't remember who made the point this evening, but to the point of, if part of the purpose of the plan is to ensure that in emergency situations we have the numbers we need to access the people in the phone tree of needs and resources, if numbers are then redacted, it seems like that to some extent defeats the purpose.
Well, as to the public, if on a need to know basis within the city, those phone numbers are published, that's fine. But yeah,
then would you recommend that instead, if we approve this plan this evening, would it make more sense for the plan itself to not be attached?
Well, I'm not sure I understand. I think you do want to publish the plan. The only complication is this legal obligation to protect the confidentiality of a personal phone number. Maybe the best way to do it is to ask the officers if they will consent to the publication only for this purpose. And if they don't want to, then it should not be published.
Okay, then I'm gonna, just for the sake of time, Doug, I'm gonna let the chief and Sylvia work this out, and then they can report back to council next Tuesday when we have our next work session what resolution they came to.
That makes sense.
Yep. Council Member Medicus.
So we did talk about the orders of session names, but there's also the department contact list that includes other people and officers in the police department. And I don't know if those are work or home phone numbers, so we should probably look at all those. The emails are all city. That's all.
Thank you. Councilmember Gonzalez.
I have a lot of concerns with this plan in terms of the administration and the public works departments. Not at all, really, with the police department. It's not supposed to be people; it's supposed to be positions and titles because of the way that it is. And so I think that I have concerns about any of the phone numbers being public. I don't think that people, if the mayor and the city administrator and the chief of police want theirs public, we had a very, very long council meeting, I'm sure you remember, Mayor, where we said we didn't want our officers' phones out, that it disrupted, when we had a lot of cell phones out, that it disrupted their ability to do their work. We wanted all calls to be on the record, and it was a long policy discussion, so I'm amazed that we're all of a sudden overturning it. But I really do have a lot of concerns. I don't feel like we have proper succession or in either administration or public works, and I don't believe we have the depth that is there. So I'm not at all comfortable moving forward with this. But if other people are, then they are. But that is certainly my concern in at least those two departments. And so I don't feel like we have an acceptable plan, and I'm concerned about how many people we don't have in it. I don't believe that we have, and I'd like to be shown that we have that level of support, because we only have one person who has those water and wastewater licenses. No one else has it on the property, and so that one person goes out, we have no redundancy.
Sylvia, did we have any redundancy? Do you know the last time we had that level of redundancy in our staff, if ever?
Our prior operations manager did not have that level of redundancy, and that's why some of our redundancy is third party testing, third party laboratories, and also City of Austin. And I also mentioned partnering with our neighboring cities as well. That is underway. We don't have any interlocals or any kind of MOU signed just yet. I have a variety of emails where they are willing. But again, you guys have never had a COOP plan, ever. This is the first one out there. I welcome the comments. I know this is not complete in 100% of its form, but to throw the baby out with the bathwater when you didn't have anything to begin with seems a little bit foolish.
Councilmember Reeds?
Yes, I just wanted to say, I think partnering with other smaller towns near us is probably a very good idea. The city of Rollingwood only has 3 people in their public works department, and they service an area about the same size with about twice as many residents. The city of Westlake Hills has about 6 people in their public works and in their planning and development, and they service probably about, I would say, 4 times the size and 4 times the residents. And so all of these don't have those areas don't have the redundancy either. And so I think that would be a wise choice, and to look at what type of partnerships we can do. We are hopeful that these pandemics aren't going to be a yearly focus. It may come back in a bit of a wave, but I'm very hopeful this won't be something that's a year after year event. So planning for a huge amount of redundancy that can be accomplished with other avenues might make the most sense for a smaller city. Thanks.
Councilmember Medicus?
I'm just wondering if, in the interest of, starting at some point, if it's possible for us to take out all of the personal emails, phone numbers, and in the event that we have to have the contact list, it would seem to me that the executive management team would have that need to know contact list, and that would live in the executive management team. So do we really need to publish that in the document for everyone in the world?
And am I correct, Councilmember Medicus, are you I don't believe you're the motion maker or the second, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so that sounds like a pretty clean and reasonable amendment. Would the motion maker accept that along with the second, which is to pull the contact information, phone numbers, and that would live only with the executive management team or those that have a need to know for that information?
Madam Mayor, I would accept
yes.
that.
And
I would accept
second,
that.
which is Councilmember Reeds.
Yes, I would also accept that.
Councilmember Medicus, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I think that'll get us past where we are now, and then we can continue to think about this and work on it as time goes by.
Thank you. And for the sake of time, I want to move us forward so that we can take a vote on this. We have one resident comment, which is Lisa Versace. And Lisa, if you did have a comment on this, you have
yeah,
the floor.
I just wanted to say thank you all for doing all the work on this. Sylvia, I think you did a great job. I'm so happy as a resident to have this in place. It gives me a lot of peace of mind, and it also kind of leads me to believe that we need more of these types of documents, particularly in the case of fire or flood or any type of issues that might happen for the residents. And I think it would be great to have plans in place for the residents, as well as continuation of staff and where they would go. Where would the residents go in case of emergency? How can we band together? How can we communicate with each other? Those types of protocols. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Councilmember Ellett and then also Councilmember Reach, you're both open. Your mics are open if there's anything else you want to add before we call the vote.
No, I think so. I would like to call a vote, and I appreciate the input we've received.
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Reed?
Yes, I will second that.
Great. All those in favor, please, through the chat feature, please indicate your vote. All those in favor say yay, and all those opposed say nay. And then the city administrator will read the vote back into the record once she has everybody.
We are at 9:01. Councilmember Rosengarten, agree. Councilmember Ellett, agree. Councilmember Medicus, agree. Councilmember Gonzalez, nay. Councilmember Rosengarten, agree. I'm sorry, I read hers twice. Councilmember Reeds, agree.
Motion passes 4-1 with 4 councilmembers for and Councilmember Gonzalez against. This now moves us on to item number 8, which is a report updating the status of outstanding RFP, RFQ items that have been previously approved by council. This was an item that was requested at our last called council meeting. This is not an action item. This is just a presentation from Sylvia.
Thank you, Mayor. The Uplands Valuation have a third bid that was received very late today. I don't know what that bid is. I've not opened it. So hopefully I will have a report at the next council meeting or an award, depending on what that value is. The performance audit is scheduled to close May 22nd. We have a tentative council date of June the 16th. The marketing also scheduled to close May 22nd, a June 16th date, and we've caveated that with if funding is available. I know there's lots of discussion as to what we're going to do with HOT, and tonight's discussion is simply only the general fund, but as we get to the discussion of the other funds, whether or not there's going to be dollars available. The engineering, the interviews are in process. That is scheduled to come to council on May the 5th. The website proposals we have received, those are scheduled for May the 19th. That's also an item that has been proposed to be cut out of the budget. There's been a lot of discussion about the OpenGov site, if we could continue using the OpenGov site and sort of migrate from our website to OpenGov. And I think that's a very possible way to save money and extend the website proposal, if at all. And then legal, we are interviewing the Thursday, the 23rd, and that is scheduled for council either May the 5th, and I think we put a late date of May 19th just because the May 5th was filling up, but possible for May the 5th as well.
Councilmember Gonzalez, you have the floor. Councilmember Gonzalez, there you go. Now we can hear you.
Okay. I'm just curious who's on the legal review team.
That's Matt, myself, and the mayor.
Okay.
And again, that's not a selection team. That is the team that's just doing an initial interview with them. Both firms will be coming back to council.
Yes, there was 2 submittals. Both met the minimum requirements, and so yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have any additional comments or questions from council members related to these updates? And since I don't see any hands up, Sylvia, are there any questions that you think should be asked right now that haven't been asked? Anything that you would like to point us to before these start coming back to council to seek final action?
I was muted. I would just ask that you pay attention to some of the cuts, for example, the website cut, if that's something that the council wishes to pursue. If it gets cut tonight, then we would be in another budget amendment or something like that later on down the road.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Just one question about the janitorial. Is there any effort being made to look at that again, or we're just going to stay on the month to month?
We're on a month-to-month process right now. I think the police chief and I continue to monitor that because none of the cleaning folks, not the folks who are going to take over and not the current folks, nobody's doing a super deep cleaning. So staff's coming up behind and doing those things anyway. So we're not really inclined to go enter into a contract at this point when there is such a limited supply out on the market. I'm not sure what price we'd get.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional questions from council members? This will move us on to item number 9, which is a report on FEMA Category B public assistance funds available to local governments. This is also not an action item. It is just a presentation from the city administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. I think there was a perception that we had thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that were going to be eligible for public assistance funding. And to date, we've only tracked about $2,100. That number might have changed a little bit since the time of printing. But the city can reasonably expect 75% of those funds to be reimbursed. We will apply for reimbursement no matter the amount. We've already received all of our information from FEMA to begin entering the worksheets or worksheets, as the case may be, into the system and awaiting our turn for an interview.
And just because I can see that we're starting to lose people out of the meeting, and there are residents that I know have asked this question that are not in the meeting. So the perception that money is available, could you briefly explain why, although there may be money available to cities, why is it limited in our case?
Well, one of the things, one of the first things they look at is need. Is the city able to cover its own need, and what are your what's your debt capacity look like, and those kinds of things? Because obviously they want you to look at your own ability first before you go and ask for any additional ability. That's not to say that none of it would get reimbursed, but they're just looking at it with a finer tooth comb, because as you can imagine, there are cities who are in much worse shape than we are at the particular moment who have applied for assistance.
Any questions from council members before we move on? Any questions from the public? Moving on to item number 10, report of budgetary actions directed by council from the April 7th, 2020 City Council meeting. Item number 7, COVID impacts. This is not an action item. It is a presentation from Sylvia.
Thank you, Mayor. The motion that was presented by Councilmember Ellen had 5 pieces. They're numbers 1 through 5. Councilmember Rosengarten asked for an amendment that was approved, and it was to freeze all merit and salary increases. So to go one by one, adopting the Budget and Finance Committee's recommendation to define essential services as those are required for health and safety. That was completed on that particular council day in that motion. So that was a complete on 4/7. Eliminate all budget allocations, number 2, deemed non-essential in the 1920 budget as discussed. And that was your initial mayor's list of 410,000. We completed that on 4/16, and that is included in agenda item number 11. And I think that 410 is something closer to $211,000. Number 3, direct the city administrator and mayor to reduce personal expense by 10 to 15%. That was completed on 4/8/2020. I believe there's going to be further action by the council as to whether determining if those positions are frozen or actually eliminated from the budget. That can come back at a future date, and I think it probably needs to be discussed at one of the one of the in-between meetings as we come back, and also something at Budget and Finance, and also something in Public Works as we determine what projects are coming online. Direct the Budget and Finance Committee to review the general fund. That was completed on 4/16, and that is also agenda item number 11, and that was a fine-tooth comb of work that the Budget and Finance Committee did. Number 5 is really just a report of those actions. Number 6 is freeze all merit salary increases or any step increases for the next 6 months. That was completed on 4/8. There will be future action for any one or all of these because we're going to need a budget amendment. As we go through and reduce and shrink the budget, we need to adopt what will then be the budget for the remainder of the year, and we'll do that through a budget amendment process. Any questions?
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you. When this got voted on, there were ands in all of this, and so that led at least one person, and I think two, to believe that all these things were being done in a coherent manner, and that it would be coming back. And I understand that there's a difference of opinion about that, but I want to put that back on the record that there were ands written in there, and then. Even if we believe that all those things were just going to happen, which I still argue with, the cuts that are 10 to 15% from the documents that were provided to Finance, as someone spoke to earlier, come to a total of 23%. So I will provide this to the city administrator. I mean, to the city administrator and Regine. But I do not see. I see them in excess of what was said here, and something in the total of when Councilmember Reitz was talking, it was in the 2.5. That comes to 375. We're at 450 roughly with these cuts with benefits. And it's possibly higher. I don't have all the frozen position numbers or anything, or the frozen merit salary increases. These are all things that impacted personnel. And I thought that a position that was apparently being filled, it's never been discussed at council about Regine's replacement, that was part of the frozen when people said that. So I think there was a lot of miscommunication about this item, and I register my unhappiness with it, but certainly that the cuts from salaries are somewhere at least in the neighborhood of 23%, according to the documents that came from Finance, and so approximately over 450K in salary cuts over the year, and so that's out there.
And I would like to add to that the comments that you're referencing came from the Vice Chair of Public Finance Committee, which is also your husband. And I already asked Sylvia to clarify that, and I'm not sure that she can do that on the spot. And so some of those numbers that were referenced in citizen comments, I personally can't speak to them. What I do know is that the information that was provided to me when the personnel reductions occurred after the vote that council took on April 7th, that I was aware that it was slightly over 15%, which is why we rolled back some of the other items that were approved that night, which included the reduction of employer coverage of medical, dental, vision, and life insurance from 100% to 80%. So although that was voted and it was part of that motion, Sylvia, the chief, and I decided not to enact that. But as Regine mentioned twice during the Budget and Finance Committee, that will be coming back as a second presentation to council, and they can then decide if they want to make that additional cut. The other thing that we rolled back that was part of the approved motion that evening was the elimination of employee benefits for the remainder of fiscal year 2019-20. And that exact amount was probably somewhere around $5,000. And so those amounts were added back in. In terms of where you come up with 23%, again, Sylvia would have to confirm that along with Regine, and I'm not sure that they can, but that in no way matches the numbers that were presented to me, which the number presented to me was 15.5% was the reduction. Councilmember Medicus.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say too that when we were discussing the action item that this relates to, in all of the discussions that we had, I was under the impression it was all coming back for finalization to council at tonight's meeting. I just wanted to state that for the record. But I also have a question here on number 3. It doesn't make any sense to me what we're saying here. Further future action by council to classify the position. I don't know what we're referring to there. What's the position?
It should be the positions as frozen or eliminated completely from the budget. Did we just do a reduction in force during the period of the budget, or are the positions completely eliminated from the budget?
Okay, I would just like that clarified or corrected.
Thank you. And I would add to that clarification and correction that the word frozen was not part of the action, and that is a very misleading statement. And so the way that Sylvia just stated it is more appropriate, which is once a position is emptied, whether it's a layoff, termination, or the employee retires or leaves their position, it still remains in the budget. And so the council needs to either remove it from the budget, which then also would require the action to remove it from the organizational chart, or to give clear direction to staff as to whether or not you want that position to be filled, which would of course involve posting it and revisiting the job description before you rehire to fill that position, and considering if you want to change anything about the job title or duties.
So Mayor, I have a question about that.
Yes.
It was my understanding that the action we took was a result of COVID-19 and dealing with the crisis related to that. Would the same procedure be handled when we're talking about for the limit of the crisis? Versus like something permanent where we're changing the whole structure and.
Well, that's why this report to me indicated, and again, I do understand there's a difference in opinion within the elected officials of what was voted on. My understanding was that 1 through 6 were voted on, and that the ands indicated that each one of those things was to be completed, and that there was supposed to be a report back at this meeting. That's what this report back does. And in the report, it tells you if there is subsequent action that would need to be taken by council. And so on this particular item, the subsequent action would be you as a council needs to tell staff and myself what you want to do. And so that could be do nothing. It could be refill the positions post-COVID, which post-COVID you would need to define what that is, or if you want to leave it open as part of something to be reconsidered as we go through the budget process and adopt the budget for next year.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Mayor, I'm curious if it is in excess of 15%, how this is going to be rectified.
Well, I just explained to you how when it was presented to me, which was 15.5%, that's why we didn't enact the other 2 parts that were approved in the part of the motion, which was the reduction of 100% to 80% and the benefits. And so for all of that, which again, I do believe that Regine clarified this twice during the budget and finance meeting, but the idea would be that her and Sylvia would bring that back to council with clear numbers, which is now that council has adopted something tonight, hopefully, Regine and Sylvia can then say, this is exactly what the percentage of personnel reduction was. And whether you include Katie's position in that or not, whether you include Quentin's position in that or not, to me, that's some of the politics in which you as council members need to decide if you want to include 2 positions that were already empty prior to that action being taken.
Okay.
Do we have any additional comments from council members before we move on to the action item? This moves us to our final item of the evening, which is item number 11, receive recommendations from the Budget and Finance Committee regarding the reductions in expenditures, reduction or elimination of programs and services provided by the city, and reductions in any other expenditures, including employee, material, supplies, equipment, service costs. Council may act to adopt any such recommendation with or without modification, and may also provide additional direction to the Budget and Finance Committee. So this is the action item where myself and Sylvia are looking for two things. One would be an adoption of all or some part of this chart. This chart represents what the Budget and Finance Committee voted on at their last meeting, which was last Thursday. And the second part would be providing clear direction as to what council would like to see the Budget and Finance Committee work on next. And Sylvia, can you just, before we move to presentation and council input, was this a unanimous vote from the Budget and Finance Committee?
Yes.
And is anything changed on this chart from what they approved last Thursday?
No. Actually, you know what? Mr. Carmona may have voted. Mr. Carmona was the dissenting vote on this.
Great. So it was all in favor except for Alfonso.
Yes, correct.
Councilmember Rosengarten.
I believe that staff, the mayor, and the finance committee did an excellent job on finding areas where we could cut, and I would recommend and move that we approve the hard work that they did.
We have a motion to approve, and because I have other council members with their hands up, if there is a second to Councilmember Rosengarten's motion, if you would please indicate second in the chat feature. We have a motion from Councilmember Rosengarten to approve. Do we have a second? We have a second from Councilmember Ellett. That opens it for input from council members and the public. And so I have a series of hands that are raised, so I'm going to go through them in the order that they are on my screen. Councilmember Medicus.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I attended the complete finance meeting, and it was my understanding that the finance committee, they did a yeoman's job, by the way, amazing work, going through line by line, that this was their review of the worst case scenario. And this is what they are sending to council, not necessarily for us to not review this and go through this, but this is the absolute worst case scenario of everything they found that could be cut. And I have a concern about item number 10 being cut, which is the cost of service and rate study. And I think it's important that we embark upon that sooner rather than later, because it's going to take some time for that all to information to be available for us in our future planning in the budget. And there's going to be a lot of discussion around that. So I would like to see that item retained.
And Sylvia, the cost of service and rate study, is that the item that relates to the utility rate study?
Yes, it was a $20,000 item that carried over from last year into this year. And my comment to the Budget and Finance Committee was we may not get it complete this year. We may not spend all $20,000 of it. And so when I talked to Councilmember Medicus, I thought if at least $10,000 of it was held back, it could at least get us started into the next budget year.
And so Councilmember Medicus, what I'm understanding is that you're making a friendly amendment to the motion. Would it be to retain the full 20,000 or a smaller portion from item number 10?
I think at this point we can afford to retain the whole 20,000. We may not use it all, but I'd like to have it there to get the project done.
And so Councilmember Rosengarten, you are the motion maker. Would you accept that amendment?
I need to understand more. First off, the cost of service and rate study basically tells us whether or not the last time we did it was to find out if the commercial is paying more of the burden than the residential. We already know that information. For $20,000, you can use that money and pay for utilities that are otherwise subsidies. subsidized. So there's $20,000 already. We can put this off, put it in the budget for next year. Thus, we will get through this COVID-19 and then have the money to use for next year. My opinion.
And so, Councilmember Rosengarten, are you wanting additional information, or are you simply saying no to the amendment?
No to the amendment.
Great, that ends that. Councilmember Ellett, did you want to speak? You have your hand up.
No, I just say I would concur with the motion maker. As a seconder, I would concur with the motion maker.
Are there any other comments you want to make on this particular item?
I do actually, and it's just an education process for myself. And if I look through this, and I look at the totals at the bottom, and I look at the blue, the white, the green, and the yellow, and we total those up, and I look at this from the point of view. I look at what the true operating. First of all, I want to thank the Budget and Finance Committee. I also sat in on that, and it was a tough job, and they were very diligent, and they put in the long hours to do that. So I want to thank them, and that's why I agreed with Councilmember Rosengarten on we should listen to what they have to say. We gave them a tax; they did a great job, and they came back with it. But if I look at this, the true costs that were taken out of operating the city are $825,203.08. And that's the combination of the mayor's rescue plan cuts, the salary cuts, the repair and replacement contribution, and then the $262,568 in addition that came from the Budget and Finance Committee. The rest, which is $1 million, I understand it's coming out of the budget, but what we're saying there is we will not be transferring money to those three programs. That's utilities, infrastructure, the subsidies, and to replenish the reserve. So we will not be making contributions to those. And I liken it to the fact we're not transferring money from our checking account into our savings account. And the true cost we've taken out in terms of the operations of the city at $825,203.08. That's as I understand it. If someone can educate me differently or give me a different viewpoint, I'm open to that.
Is that the end of your comment, Councilmember Ellett?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
The only thing, what I would like to add to Councilmember Ellett's comment is, as I've heard residents saying, we need to use our reserves. It's important that we also look to reserves. We currently have 11.7 months of reserves. And so to use the analogy of a home and a savings account, that means you have 11.7 months of reserve money in your saving account. If this is approved tonight, we are saying that we want $358,365 of our money that was earmarked to go into that savings account to not. So when residents are referring to 12 months or greater, this portion that would not be moved into our savings account, in my opinion, would mean we are choosing to keep that in our operating budget, which means we are in fact using our reserves as of now. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so while that is true, we're also lowering the amount of what our expenditures are. So the reserves are built upon how much our annual budget is. So all of that is a moving target at this point. I think that the Finance Committee did an incredible job, and I had gone over it before, and there wasn't anything. There was no stone left unturned from what I'd come up with as well. So I'm very in support of this. But what it also does is it gives us in excess of. It puts us in a surplus situation, and so it allows us to have room to bring our staff back. That's what it does. And I think that while that didn't get discussed by the parameters of the meeting, it is certainly part of the impetus. And so I think that that bringing our staff back should be on the table with the adoption of this. And I think putting the $20,000 back in for the rate study, which I think is really important, and it's different than what Councilmember Rosengarten described. we do need to do it at some point by law. And it's not just to answer the same question that we asked before, but to be able to actually make any changes in our rate structure. We by law have to have that information before we can adjust anything, and we do need to do some adjustments. And so we were stalling. This is something that I fought for when it first got in, long before I got on council. And the reason that we have to have it is it is just a thing that as us running utility, we need to have that information. In order to charge rates, we need to be able to say what the basis is, and we need to have a third party say what that is. So that is the point. It isn't to redo what we did before, but to actually be able to assess rates in an accurate manner. So I do think people should reconsider that, and at least to the tune of 10,000 to get it started, but preferably 20 to just get it done. And then I do think that we should bring back some staff, because I do believe we're understaffed. So in a situation where we have a potential 40% reduction. So I will put those things out there. But that said, I am totally in favor of the work that Finance did. Thank you.
Councilmember Medicus. Councilmember Medicus, you are muted. There you go.
Sorry. Oh, so just to be for clarification, I the positions that were cut, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5 positions totaled, if I'm reading this right, $123,571.97. Is that correct?
Sorry, I was muted. Salary totals all the way at the bottom is $217,831.
Does that includes though the other 2 positions that weren't the recent layoffs?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, right. So I was just talking about the recent layoffs that we just did were 123,571.
Yes, whatever the 217 minus 70 minus Quinton's 23, yeah. So 217 minus 90 through 94.
94,259.
Whatever that number is, yes.
So the cuts from 4.8 were 123,571. And I just want to understand this. When we looked at the spreadsheet that you did, Sylvia, that was the pre-COVID and the post-COVID numbers. The amount that we needed, this was all based on an 80% reduction in sales tax revenue.
Yes.
And so what we were saying is that we needed 1.728823 to get us through September, and that was based on the 80% sales tax reduction.
Correct. That was based on 80% sales tax reduction and no changes to anything else. We would keep operating as normal.
And Sylvia, because I've heard this get misstated a handful of times. The 80% reduction is for April, an 80% reduction for May, a 40% reduction for June, 30% for July, 30% for August, 30% for September. So the initial estimate was to create that there would be a potential shortfall of as much as 1.3 million based on those projections. So there isn't any official adoption from staff or council member as to what actual shortage will be. And when we say 80%, we need to always clarify, are we talking about an 80% reduction in the estimate for the year, or are you talking about a monthly? Because typically, not typically, but many residents, including myself, what we do is we look at the revenue as it comes in month to month, not just as a yearly or year-to-date amount.
I understand, but what I was looking at is this projections post-COVID 19, that budget at a glance.
Yes,
that's what I'm looking at, and that's at 80% reduction. And then we got the fiscal year 1920 sales tax projections, and that number doesn't match that number.
So I don't, at this point, I don't know what you're referring to. So Sylvia might know what you're referring to.
The budget at a glance was the very initial discussion, Mayor, that we had, which showed, I believe it was 80% for 2 months, 60%, et cetera, et cetera. It showed a budget shortfall, all other things being equal, of 1.7 and some change. And then we went through and said, okay, what does that mean from a monthly drawdown of reserves? And I believe it was $288,000. If
Okay.
I remember it. Yeah, if I'm
And so
remembering.
again, to just stop there, when you're saying 80%, you're not saying 80% for the year, and you're also not saying 80% for every single month remaining.
Not 80% for the year, but our very first swath at this was 80% for the remainder of the year. And then we went back and made adjustments to that. But the one Karen's looking at was the very first out of the chute, when we asked, okay, what's actually in the bank? What do we have to work with, and what would need to be drawn down? That was the very first sort of out of the chute. And it was a $1.7 million deficit that we would have been facing. That also, the estimate that was in for the month of April, which would have been February report, actually our estimate was high because it came in at 11% less, or 9% of budget. So even that estimate, and that's all it was. It's an estimate because it's a moving target. We didn't really know what it was going to be.
I'm just trying to tie numbers together because we then got the sales tax projections for fiscal year 1920. That has those little charts on it, whether
Yes.
green tax or
That's the one I'm talking about. That's the one I'm talking about, that actually February came in 11% less from the estimate, 9% of budget less than what we had even projected we were going to receive. So we started to see a decline even before the March COVID stuff, which was actually a little bit of a surprise to us.
Right, because that chart shows sales tax to revenue being at 2.684. If you're looking at over the whole year.
Over for the year, yes, but we are looking at a month to month because we're projecting what's going to be April, what's going to be,
Yeah, that has the projections all the way through September. And so that total is 2.684. So just trying to connect that to this initial report that we got, because it was this pre and post COVID budget at a glance that we were looking at when we were looking at the things to cut on the 7th, when we were talking about what kind of reduction. And I haven't seen another budget at a glance since then, so that's what I have to go on.
No, you're right. And after the discussion tonight, and then also Public Works Committee meets on Thursday. Public Works Committee is also going to make further reductions to unemergent projects, I guess I should say, or non-emergent projects, and then make a prioritization of projects. And there may be some ability in some of those funds to be able to absorb some general fund costs as well. So there's still some moving parts out there. This one that we're looking at tonight is just the general fund.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get as complete a picture as we can, because I feel like we made some, personally felt like we took some actions at the 7th meeting that were taken without actually looking at a big picture and having all these numbers across the board. So I just wanted to clarify that we're in a position where we don't know what we don't know.
I would agree. We're in a position where we don't know. And new information is coming out, I mean, literally every week. So
I'm wondering if this is budget's intense work on a budget and finance committee on worst case scenario. And do we need the other information from Public Works and the information that's coming out, especially with the governor saying we're reopening business, to get the big picture so that we really take action that's absolutely necessary?
Is that the end of your statement, Councilmember Medicus?
For now. Thank you.
Councilmember Rosengarten?
I wanted to talk further about the rate study. The Finance Committee talked about that item thoroughly, and they vetted it thoroughly. And like I mentioned earlier, everything is on the table right now for the next 6 months. So that was pulled out of the budget. During the budget process, we can put it in for next year. Next year starts October 1. It gets us through this COVID-19 scare. Then shortly thereof, we can have the water study done, and then we can look at what the rate changes show us, if anything at all, if we wanted to increase rates. But I want to read you an article that I read today from the City of Austin Utilities, and it is Emergency Measures in Response to COVID-19. In recognition of the impact the COVID-19 is having on the entire Austin community, the mayor and city council approved emergency utility relief efforts. How the city is helping with rate adjustments and reductions. They are reducing Austin Energy residential and commercial regulatory charges. They are also reducing Austin water rates for all residential customers. Most residential customers will see immediate savings on their water bill. Austin Water is providing a 10% reduction in residential water, tiers 1 through 3, and wastewater, tiers 1 through 2, volume rates, which is projected to provide an estimated $6 million in utility bill savings. So at this tough time where residents or folks within the area are losing jobs or taking hardships, these changes aim to get immediate utility bill relief to our customers who are experiencing significant hardship due to the unprecedented coronavirus pandemic. And I think we can wait 6 months before we go forward with the study and then look at the rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rosengarten. Councilmember Reitz.
Yes, may I speak?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I would like Public Works Committee to look at the transfer to the utilities infrastructure of $215,000. That transfer that is put in the column to not happen this year, that doesn't mean that need goes away on that one. It's not like, oh, we just won't do that project. This is a fund that, if I remember correctly, goes dry about $1 million in about 10 years, and we fund it every year, building up to what our future projections are in expenses. And so I would like to see and understand the impact of cutting that transfer to the utilities infrastructure, and I'd like Public Works Committee to comment on that. Thank you.
Councilmember Medicus.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Councilmember Rosengarten's reading of what the city of Austin is doing. It was my understanding in finance that in order for us to even look at doing anything with the rates, we would need by law to do this rate study. And that even if we were to take action to make any changes, that wouldn't be anywhere near the short term. That would be in the long term. Perhaps not even in next year's budget, but we do need to have that legally to start digging into that. And Austin's utility system, from what I understand, is a money-making system. Ours is not. We're funding that with the general fund. So I just wanted to make sure I understood those things correctly.
And that's a very good point, because utility funds, enterprise funds typically support the general fund. And so Austin Utility will be drawing down its reserve, will be drawing down to supplement what isn't necessarily going to be kicked to the general fund, or the general fund will have some negative impact to it as well. There's a chain reaction that's going to happen with those changes in the rates or those reductions. I'd be interested. I'm going to tell you, if I was a betting person, I would say they're going to draw down their reserves within the utility fund. very similar to what we are proposing to do here today.
Councilmember Rosengarten.
In speaking to Councilmember Reed's question about having Public Works look at where we're not putting funds into utility infrastructure, that would simply cause us to look at also doing changes where the years are extended. For instance, previously it was 20 years. Then Katie agreed, well, we could put it off for 30 years and expand the time that we need to have money set aside for that infrastructure. Do keep in mind, a lot of cities don't even have this type of reserve that we're setting aside. So we're very fortunate. So what we could do is go to one more year, 31 year, and extend that infrastructure expense longer to delay us getting into a deficit. Thank you.
So I think that would be fine. We did extend it from 30 years to 40 years. So
Sorry.
we would go into 41 years, which
Correct.
probably is fine. I would just like the Public Works to comment on that.
Absolutely.
Don't see any additional council member comments. Councilmember Gonzalez, I'm going to move to public comments after this and then call for the vote on the motion. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Mayor, I'm just going to go ahead and echo what Councilmember Rosengarten said, just to ease Councilmember Reetz's mind. I think it's a good question. I'm generally in favor of everything going to Public Works, and we can certainly get them to, provide input, which will be Thursday, and for our next meeting at the work session, and we can certainly make a change if we need to. But it's my understanding that it's a flexible plan, and we're bumping it down the road one more year by doing this. We wouldn't want to do it 2 years in a row, but we can certainly absorb 1 year in that fund. That's my opinion as a longtime member of both Finance and Public Works.
Aneshka or Alfonso, I'm not sure which of you has the microphone. Yes, you have the floor, Alfonso.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Yes. Looking in this case, that page, I try to understand that from today to the end of the fiscal year, September 30, from where we will have the money to pay. So the money that we have, they say they are cuts, and the cuts, they are $1.85 million. So that cuts means that we don't spend that money. So, but in this case, and that was my discussion before, and now Phil, he mentioned that, and Wanda, she mentioned that, the transfer from the utilities to the infrastructure, they are from general fund. So means that we need to produce that money in general fund and later send that to utilities. Subsides is in the same way. We have to produce that money and send that to utilities. And replenish of the reserve is in the same way. So in reality, the cuts is not 1.85 millions. We have to have 1 million transfer subsides and replenish, then they need to come from someplace. So the idea is that at this moment we will use the reserves of how we will pay for all of these from now to September 30. So the only way is in some areas, as you say, in the operational budgets, that cuts community fire planning, training, fuels, etc. You made your cuts. So this is something that in reality you reduce, but you cannot reduce these others. So I don't understand that, because the only that you can reduce is $825,000. And then we will be doing in public works the Committee of Public Works will be working with the funds, different funds, not general fund. And the other funds, they have the reserves. So this is why I think I am really confused. So how we will pay for the budget from now to September if we don't produce enough revenues? The only way has to come from reserves. Obviously, we need to plan, as they say, the rate study has to come. We approved that 3 years ago. So we procrastinate, and now it's necessary. And we discuss a lot. It's not that we for these people we will raise $5, and for these other people we will raise $10. No, this is a serious program and project that we need to do. And in that case, we will have the commercial. How we will work with the commercial? What will be our criteria? So when Karen she mentioned is by law, it's true. It's by law. It's not that members of the community we sit down and we decide how we will raise or how we will reduce. All of this has to go with some special specifications for the different users of the water. So the rate study is something that also is in general fund. But my point again is that then I think then feel still with doubts and other people there. Because if you cut $1.85 million, you cut that from where? If $1 million, they are not there. You need to produce that in general fund. So we need to be careful what we say, please.
If a resident were to call me tonight, if this gets approved and a resident were to call me tonight or email me about this or talk to me tomorrow, the way that I would explain it is I would show them a screenshot of these four totals that amount to 1.8, and I would say, council has not made a most extreme step. They have made a first step. Council has now taken action to reduce $825,000 from our current operation budget general fund. 3 additional moves were made, one of which is the choice to use $358,000 of our reserve funding in our current operational budget. And the second two are the decision to not move money into our subsidies and utility infrastructure. And then I would recap it by saying 3 of the 4 moves are not actually cuts. They're just decisions to not slide money around in a way that is in accordance with how our budget was adopted last year. So I don't know if that's the exact same thing you're saying, Alfonso, but if the goal of the city or the need based on information that comes in the future months, if we determine that our revenue for the year is less than 825 in reduction or higher than an 825 in reduction, yes, absolutely. Both council and budget and finance will have to find additional cuts or make a decision to use more of our remaining reserve, which is currently 11.7 months. And yes, Councilmember Gonzalez is correct. At some point, staff will need to give us an update based on our current reduced burn rate, how that 11.7 months is potentially extended to be a longer reserve than when it was originally budgeted. Councilmember Rosengarten.
Mayor, thank you. You said it very well. That's exactly what it is. And you're explaining that fact that we are not moving or transferring funds that normally we transfer. That is very well put. Back to the rate study. The question is, do we have to do a rate study every year?
No.
How often do we have to do a rate study?
There's some parameters. I don't know exactly, Councilmember Rosengarten. They're typically 3 to 5 is what I would tell you. I'm thinking in my last city we did them every 5 years, but I'll have to give you some specific information.
I know the answer. It's 5 years or greater. You don't have to do them every year. You don't have to do them every 3 years. So no, you don't. Thank you.
Council members, this is going to be the last call for comments from council members. Councilmember Medicus.
So we don't have to do them, I understand, except every 5 years. But my question then is, do we have to do a rate study if we're going to adjust rates?
You have to have some defendable information to adjust the rates, especially if you're going from 0 to 60 or whatever rate we would end up doing. I would highly recommend that we do some type of rate study, whether we try to do it internally ourselves or we hire a third party to do it. But we do need to do some in-depth analysis that's defendable to the Public Utility Commission.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
I just want to say that the last rate study, which didn't include actually studying that many rates, was where we could actually set rates, was 2014. So that was over 6 years ago. Thank you.
I was going to ask that question. When was the last time we did one? 2014,
and it didn't actually include enough to really set rates. Thank you.
What did it include?
You can you've got the link. I can send you the whole thing, but it was a partial study, and the part that really set the base rates and things like that were missing. It's almost 10 o'clock and my brain's slightly fried, but I'll tell you that there was a significant part that we needed to have to do everything we need to do that isn't there. And when my brain functions again, I will tell you what that is. But it was not a complete study.
Councilmember Gonzalez, was at the end of your comment?
That is the end of my statement. I just wanted to say 2014 and it wasn't complete. And that's why we need to do this.
Thank you. Councilmember Reeds.
So it was my understanding that, so this has been in the budget for a couple of years. And it was my understanding from Public Works is that the reason we have not done it is because the city of Austin was going to change rates. And they have not done that yet. And we were waiting on them to do that because whatever rate study we did might become moot after they made rate changes. So that's why this was never exercised or it was never done. So I would assume that we would want to wait until they made any changes before we did a study.
Sylvia, is that something that you can speak to?
I wouldn't necessarily think we needed to wait for the city of Austin because they're just going to give us a pass-through. Since we're a wholesale customer, there's going to be some multiplier. What we're going to have to figure out is how we spread that multiplier. I don't think the structure of the rate would change significantly other than anything new online they would have added on, any new distribution lines, those kinds of things, or that cost is now incorporated and will be passed on. It's almost like building a building, right? We have the foundation of the current rates and the current model that we have right now. The next step is what's the fair and equitable way within Sunset Valley? And if Austin does complete their rate study within the next 12 months, how does that translate into any additional changes to that first floor? That's how I would look at it.
Councilmember Ellett.
Yeah, I just want to kind of summarize what I think I am right this. I go back to the original motion that Councilmember Rosengarten made, which was essentially to recognize the hard work of the Budget and Finance Committee and accept their recommendations. And I still concur with that. And also, I heard you say, Madam Mayor, in responding to Mr. Carmona, how you would describe the action that council took tonight. I agree. That's an accurate description of what we're looking at here. I do think we need to follow through on this. I do think, as Winston Churchill once said, this may not be the end, may not even be the beginning of the end, but it may be the end of the beginning because we don't know what's going to happen 3, 6, 9 months down the road. I think anybody that claims that they're an expert on this is kind of fictional in that respect. I think by doing this, we're taking a step forward. Do I think it's the ultimate step? Don't know. It may not be. But I think it's a good start, and I think it's prudent for us to recognize the work that the Budget and Finance Committee has done. We gave them a task. They did it. They accepted it. they put a lot of hours into it, and they came back with these recommendations. So that's my comments. That's where I am, and I think I appreciate all the other comments that's been raised tonight.
I would just like to add, and I think this is in line with Councilmember Medicus's comment earlier, 1.7 versus 1.8, and $100,000, and do we need to cut that? Can that be sit in contingency if we need to ramp staff back up? I would say that my first recommendation as we add staff back, as the projects come forward and hopefully we begin to reopen and whatever method that looks like, I would really look to the other funds before the general fund to try to offset some of that staff costs. We do some of those transfers already from within the funds to cover some salary expense. I would just urge us to explore that and be a little bit more aggressive with that, and let the general fund sort of catch its breath and begin to rebuild itself enough so that we still have the ability to do what we said we were going to do within the fund itself in terms of health and safety. But I don't want to necessarily take the staffing component out, especially if we need a temp or so, whatever we need to get us through the very end of it. To Councilmember Gonzalez's point, if we, if our staffing levels fall to 20%, or God forbid, we've got to have City of Austin take us over for a while.
Councilmember Gonzalez. Councilmember Gonzalez, did you have something else that you wanted to say before we call the vote this evening?
Sorry, Mayor, can you hear me? Sorry, I thought you could hear me. Sorry. Yes, I want to call the question, and my caveat to this is that I'm going to say this is great work, and the minute that that we possibly can, I think staff needs to come back, and I think, but I definitely am in favor of moving forward and appreciating Finance's excellent work. So I hope we call the question and move forward.
Thank you, and I don't see that there are any additional comments, and it is noted for the record, Councilmember Gonzalez and Councilmember Medicus indicating that they want staff to come back, but to be clear for residents who are listening, or as we tell the story tomorrow, that is not part of the proposal that's being voted on right now. And so that is, although that may be a desire, that would be something that council would have to discuss and decide at a later date. Council members, if you would please cast your vote in the chat area. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. And Sylvia, if you would read the vote.
Yes. Councilmember Rosengarten, yes. Councilmember Ellett, yes. Councilmember Reeds, yes. Councilmember Medicus, no. Councilmember Gonzalez, yes.
Motion passes 4-4, 1 against. And do we have a motion to adjourn? Councilmember Medicus?
Motion to adjourn.
Councilmember Rosengarten?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion from Councilmember Medicus and a second from Councilmember Rosengarten. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And
Aye.
Sylvia, if you would let me know, is it unanimous?
It is unanimous.
Sylvia. We are adjourned at 10:04 p.m.
Yes.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3.
Thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you.
Good night.